pyramids stood tall, but those who built them rested on nothing more than sand, stone, and exhaustion. Tonight we step quietly into the world of ancient Egyptian slaves, where rest came without comfort and sleep was stolen between tasks. No pillows, no privacy, just aching bodies and the weight of a civilization pressing down. It wasn't just back-breaking work, it was sleepless survival. If silent struggles and softly told truths help ease your night, then you're right where you belong. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to keep discovering the untold, the overlooked, and the quietly human side of history, one calming story at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. As the golden sun descends beyond the western bank of the Nile, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, long shadows stretch across the desert sands. The colossal forms of the pyramids, those eternal mountains of stone, cast their cooling shade over the land. Beneath these monumental shadows, countless lives unfolded in the rhythmic patterns of ancient Egyptian society, lives that history has often reduced to a single word: slaves. Yet, as the evening light softens the harsh edges of the desert, so too must we soften and nuance our understanding of those who labored in this ancient civilization. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of the Giza Plateau as twilight approaches. The air gradually cools from the day's blistering heat, carrying with it the scent of river water, baked earth, and the faint aroma of cooking fires being kindled in the worker villages that nestled near the great construction sites. Here, at the boundary between day and night, we begin our journey into understanding the complex reality of servitude in ancient Egypt, a reality far more nuanced than popular imagination has led us to believe. The very word slave conjures specific images in our modern minds of people in chains, stripped entirely of freedom and personhood, treated as mere property. But in the language of ancient Egypt, no single word existed that perfectly maps onto our modern concept of slavery. Instead, there existed various categories of bound laborers, servants, and conscripted workers, each with different rights, responsibilities, and relationships to the state and their overseers. The ancient Egyptians used terms like hem, servant, back, worker, and mer, bound person, to describe those in various states of servitude. These categories were fluid, overlapping, and often temporary, creating a spectrum of unfreedom rather than the rigid, slave-free binary we might expect. Many of those who built the great monuments of Egypt were not slaves in the classical sense, but conscripted peasants, fulfilling their obligation to the state during the annual inundation of the Nile when farming became impossible. Archaeological evidence from worker villages at sites like Deir el-Medina and the Giza Plateau reveals a surprising truth. Those who labored on Egypt's grandest projects often lived in planned communities with standardized housing, received regular payment in the form of food and supplies, and even had access to medical care. Analysis of skeletal remains shows that while their work was undoubtedly difficult, most laborers were reasonably well nourished and received treatment for injuries. Hardly the treatment we would expect for people considered merely as disposable property. The soft evening breeze carries whispers of a more complex story than the one often told. Consider the workers who built the tomb of Pharaoh Khufu, the Great Pyramid. Graffiti found within the pyramid's hidden chambers tells us these workers organized themselves into competitive teams with playful names like the Drunkards of Menkaure or the Friends of Khufu. They took pride in their work, leaving behind these marks of identity and even humor. Would people entirely stripped of agency and dignity leave such personal marks upon history's greatest monuments? As night deepens over the ancient landscape, stars emerge like scattered jewels across the indigo canvas of the sky. Beneath this celestial canopy, different classes of Egyptian society prepared for the night's rest. Among them were those in various states of servitude, from household servants in the villas of the wealthy to agricultural workers in the vast estates of the temples, from skilled artisans conscripted for royal projects to prisoners of war assigned to labor far from their homelands. The relationship between servitude and freedom was not always clear-cut in ancient Egyptian society. A person might be bound to service yet own property, form a family, practice a religion, bring legal complaints, and even rise through social ranks if their skills proved valuable. Some entered states of temporary servitude voluntarily, perhaps, to pay off debt or secure protection during times of hardship. Others were born into households where they served, yet might develop close and even affectionate relationships with the families they served. Relationships reflected in tomb paintings where servants are sometimes shown alongside family members. Foreign captives, particularly from Nubia to the south and territories in the Near East, faced more severe conditions. Brought to Egypt through military campaigns, these individuals experienced the harshest reality of forced labor. Yet even their status evolved over time. Many eventually integrated into Egyptian society, particularly if they brought valuable skills or adopted Egyptian customs and beliefs. The archaeological record shows that within a generation or two, the descendants of these captives often achieved greater autonomy and social standing. The pyramid builders themselves were likely Egyptian peasant farmers who worked on these massive projects during the annual flooding of the Nile. For approximately 3 months each year, when their fields lay submerged beneath life-giving waters, these farmers turned their labor to the pharaoh's monuments. Far from the image of slaves driven by the lash, evidence suggests these workers considered their service a form of tax payment and religious duty. They worked in rotating shifts, temporarily leaving their villages to live in purpose-built communities near construction sites. As the cool night air settles over the desert, we might contemplate how different life was for these ancient laborers, compared to the popular imagination. Their lives were undoubtedly hard by modern standards, filled with physical labors in a harsh climate, bound by social obligations and hierarchies difficult for us to fully comprehend. Yet they were not mere cogs in a machine, not faceless masses toiling without identity or recognition. They were individuals with names, families, beliefs, and a sense of purpose within their society. The moonlight bathes the ancient stones in silver, softening their contours as it must once have softened the features of those who rested in their shadow after long days of labor. Perhaps it is in these quiet moments between work and sleep that we might best understand the humanity of those who served in ancient Egypt. Moments when, regardless of social status, all people shared the universal needs for rest, for shelter, for the comfort of familiar surroundings before surrendering to dreams. Archaeological excavations at worker villages reveal the physical spaces where various classes of laborers lived and slept. At Deir el-Medina, home to the skilled artisans who created the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, neat rows of modest but well-built houses lined carefully planned streets. Each house typically contained a main room, a kitchen, storage areas, and sleeping quarters. These were not the cramped hovels we might expect for the unfree, but functional homes where families lived, children were raised, and communities formed. As we contemplate these ancient sleeping spaces under the star-filled Egyptian night, we begin to understand that the story of servitude in ancient Egypt resists simple categorization. The human experience, then as now, was filled with complexity, contradiction, and nuance. Those who served existed within a social system very different from our own, with concepts of freedom, obligation, and personhood that do not neatly align with modern Western perspectives. The night grows deeper, the desert cools, and the ancient stones stand silent testament to lives long passed into history. Tomorrow, when the sun rises once again over the timeless landscape of Egypt, we will explore more deeply the specific conditions of life and sleep for those who served in this ancient civilization. For now, as the stars wheel overhead, in their eternal procession, we rest in the understanding that beneath the monumental achievements of ancient Egypt beat the hearts of countless individuals whose lives and labors, however constrained, carried meaning and dignity often overlooked in simplified historical narratives. As the gentle weight of night settles over the desert, allow yourself to sink into the sand of time, to feel the ancient rhythms of a world, both distant and familiar. The pyramids stand silhouetted against the star-filled sky, their perfect geometric forms defying the organic chaos of nature, just as the complexity of human experience defies our attempts at simple categorization. In understanding those who labored beneath the shadow of these monuments, perhaps we learn something essential about ourselves, about the universal human capacity for finding meaning and purpose, for creating connection and community, even within systems of constraint and obligation. As dawn breaks over the ancient land of Egypt, the first golden rays of sunlight catch the tops of papyrus reeds, swaying gently along the Nile's banks. These humble plants, gathering morning dew on their feathery crowns, would become the medium upon which Egyptians recorded their world, transforming fleeting thoughts and transactions into whispers that would carry across millennia. It is through these fragile yet enduring records that we glimpse the true nature of servitude in the two lands, a reality far more nuanced than our modern concept of slavery. Imagine yourself seated beside a scribe in the cool morning hours, watching as he carefully prepares a fresh sheet of papyrus. With practiced precision, he dips his reed pen into a cake of black ink made from soot and gum arabic, then begins to form the elegant hieroglyphs that will document a household inventory. Amongst the items listed are jars of grain, pieces of furniture, livestock, and, notably, people referred to as servants of the estate. They are recorded alongside property, yet these same documents reveal they possessed rights and identities that simple property never could. The ancient Egyptian language offers us our first clue to understanding this complex reality. Where we might search for a single word meaning slave, we find instead a constellation of terms describing various forms of bound service. Words like hem, back, mer, and herier. Each denoted different relationships of servitude, from temporary, conscripted laborers to lifetime household servants, from prisoners of war to those serving temple estates. These linguistic distinctions reflect a society that recognized many shades of unfreedom, rather than a simple division between free and enslaved. Legal papyri tell us even more about the status of those in servitude. Rather than being completely stripped of rights, many bound laborers in ancient Egypt could own property, marry as they chose, pass inheritances to their children, and even bring legal complaints against those who mistreated them. A remarkable papyrus from the New Kingdom period records the case of a servant woman who successfully petitioned for justice when she was denied her proper food rations. Hardly the action of someone considered mere property without legal standing. As the morning progresses and the air warms with the rising sun, imagine following a group of workers making their way to the fields belonging to a temple estate. These individuals might be described as servants of the god bound to work lands, owned by the temple. Yet, archaeological evidence and textual records show they lived in family units, received payment for their labor in the form of food, clothing, and shelter, and could sometimes rise to positions of responsibility if they showed skill and dedication. Their servitude was economic and institutional rather than a complete denial of personhood. The papyrus records whisper to us across time, revealing that many in states of servitude came to their position through various paths. Some were born into service, others entered it voluntarily during times of famine or economic hardship, trading some freedom for security and sustenance. Still others were foreign captives brought to Egypt through military campaigns, particularly from Nubia to the south and territories in the Levant to the northeast. Their experiences varied widely depending on their origins, skills, and the specific context of their service. The famous tale of Sinuhe, inscribed on papyrus around 1875 BCE, tells of an Egyptian official who flees Egypt only to long for return to his homeland. During his exile, he describes how foreign servants in his household were treated. "I gave water to the thirsty, I showed the way to him who had gone astray, and I rescued the plundered one." This literary text suggests an ethical standard for treatment of dependents and servants, not one of harsh exploitation, but of basic care and respect within a hierarchical relationship. By midday, when the sun stands high above the fertile valley, the distinction between various forms of labor becomes visible in the landscape itself. In the fields, peasant farmers who owed labor service to the crown or temple might work alongside those in more permanent servitude. Yet administrative texts tell us these farmers maintained their own identities, returned to their homes and families when their service was complete and were not considered property to be bought and sold. Their obligation was to the institution, the crown, the temple, the estate, rather than to an individual owner. Household servants, depicted in countless tomb paintings and reliefs, present another category altogether. Shown preparing food, serving meals, making beds, and caring for children, these individuals lived in closest proximity to those they served. Some tomb scenes show what appears to be genuine affection between household members and their servants, with servants sometimes buried near their masters or included in funerary rituals, suggesting relationships more complex than mere ownership, as afternoon light begins to soften, casting longer shadows across the landscape. Consider the royal workshops where fine goods were produced for the pharaoh and elite. Here, skilled artisans, labeled servants of the palace, created exquisite jewelry, furniture, and art objects. Despite their bound status, these individuals possessed valuable skills that gave them a measure of respect and security. Archaeological evidence from artisan communities shows they often lived better than common farmers, with more substantial housing and diets, despite technically being in service to the state. Perhaps most revealing are the documents recording transfers of servants between households. Unlike the slave markets of classical Greece or Rome, Egyptian servants were typically transferred as part of larger property transactions, inheritance divisions, or as gifts between elite families. The papyri recording these transfers often include the names of the servants, sometimes listing their skills and family connections, acknowledging their individuality even as they were moved between households. Foreign captives, particularly those brought to Egypt following military campaigns, generally faced the harshest conditions, at least initially. Victory scenes on temple walls show bound captives presented before Pharaoh, destined for service in royal projects, temple estates, or households of the elite. Yet even for these individuals, complete dehumanization was not the norm. Over time, many integrated into Egyptian society, adopted Egyptian names and customs, and their descendants gradually gained greater autonomy and status. As the afternoon wanes and the light takes on the golden quality of approaching evening, we might reflect on how different this system was from chattel slavery as practiced in other ancient societies and much later historical periods. In ancient Egypt, a person's worth was not erased by their servitude. Their humanity remained acknowledged even within systems of obligation and constraint. Though their freedom was limited, their personhood was not. A subtle but crucial distinction that shaped the experience of both those who served and those who commanded service. The papyri also whisper to us of resistance and negotiation within these systems. Records speak of servants who fled from harsh masters, of those who appealed to authorities when mistreated, and of careful negotiations over conditions of service. One remarkable document records workers on a royal project going on strike when their rations were delayed, an act of collective action that would be unthinkable if these workers were considered mere property without agency or voice. In the warm glow of late afternoon, we might consider how the religious beliefs of ancient Egyptians influenced their conception of servitude. In a culture where all, from pharaoh to the humblest servant, would face judgment in the afterlife based on their adherence to Ma'at, the concept of truth, balance, and justice, certain ethical standards were expected in the treatment of dependents. The Book of the Dead includes declarations such as, "I have not caused pain, I have not made anyone hungry, I have not made anyone weep," ethical claims that would ring hollow if systematic cruelty toward servants was normalized. As evening approaches and shadows lengthen across the ancient land, the papyrus records return to their storage cabinets, rolled and sealed, until tomorrow's business requires them again. Yet the human stories they contain, of service and obligation, of constraint, yet also connection, continue to unfold in countless households across Egypt. The bound servants prepare evening meals, tend to children, and ready sleeping quarters for the night ahead, moving through spaces both separate from and intimately connected to those they serve. The whispers on papyrus tell us of a world where servitude existed without the complete denial of humanity that characterized later slave systems. They reveal a society where bonds of obligation and hierarchy shaped every relationship, where complete freedom as we conceive it today was unknown to anyone, from Pharaoh, bound by divine duty, to the servant, bound by economic necessity. All existed within a complex web of mutual obligations, divine order, and social expectations that defined ancient Egyptian society. As night falls once more over the land of Egypt, and oil lamps are kindled in households both grand and humble, we pause in our exploration. The papyrus records rest in darkness now, their hieroglyphs invisible until morning light returns. Yet the human realities they document continue through the night, in the sleeping arrangements of those who served, in their dreams of better circumstances or contentment with their place, in the rhythms of rest that refreshed all bodies regardless of social station for the labors of the day to come. Before we explore those sleeping spaces in our next chapter, let us rest in the understanding that history is rarely as simple as we first imagine. The whispers preserved on papyrus caution us against projecting our modern concepts backward onto an ancient society that operated according to its own complex logic and values. In the quiet of night, as the stars emerge above the sleeping land of Egypt, perhaps we can begin to hear these ancient whispers more clearly, speaking not of absolute categories, but of the infinite shadings of human experience within systems both constraining and sustaining. As evening settles over the land of Egypt, the last light of day withdraws like receding waters, leaving pools of shadow in its wake. Along the Nile, massive reed beds rustle in the gentle breeze, their slender stems bending and straightening, in a graceful dance as ancient as the river itself. These humble plants, papyrus, reed, and rush, played countless roles in Egyptian life, from paper to boats, from food to fuel. But perhaps their most intimate service to the ancient inhabitants of the two lands came when darkness fell and weary bodies sought rest. For it was these same reeds, harvested and woven with practiced hands, that formed the sleeping surfaces upon which most Egyptians, from farmers to servants to skilled artisans, laid their heads at night. Imagine the scene as twilight deepens, in a worker village near the construction site of a temple or tomb. The day's labor complete, men and women return to simple homes of mud brick, their bodies bearing the fatigue of hours spent quarrying stone, hauling materials, or crafting the elaborate decorations that would adorn sacred spaces. Inside these modest dwellings, sleeping platforms await, some built of mud brick as permanent features along walls, others fashioned as simple wooden frames raised slightly off the packed earth floor. But what might surprise our modern sensibilities is what covers these platforms. Intricately woven mats of river reed, sometimes layered several thick, creating a surface both supportive and yielding to the contours of the resting body. Archaeological excavations at sites like Deir el-Medina, the village that housed skilled tomb workers during the New Kingdom period, circa 1550–1070 BCE, have revealed these sleeping arrangements in remarkable detail. Fragments of reed mats preserved in the dry climate show sophisticated weaving techniques, with strands interlaced to create patterns both functional and decorative. Some mats were simple and utilitarian, while others displayed complex designs that transformed these humble materials into objects of beauty as well as comfort. The craftspeople who created royal tombs by day brought their artistic sensibilities home, enriching even their simplest possessions with aesthetic value. The genius of these reed sleeping mats lay in their perfect adaptation to Egypt's climate. In a land where daytime temperatures could soar and nights might turn surprisingly cool, reed mats offered natural temperature regulation. The spaces between woven strands allowed air circulation, preventing the accumulation of body heat during warmer nights, while the insulating properties of the plant material provided protection from the cool ground during winter months. Unlike the fixed, unyielding mattresses we know today, these mats could be adjusted seasonally, layered more thickly in winter, reduced to a single layer in summer, and easily moved to roof terraces for sleeping under the stars during the hottest periods. For those in service or labor positions, the focus of our exploration, these reed mats were not merely utilitarian objects but personal possessions of significant value. Egyptians of all social classes took pride in their sleeping arrangements, and even those with limited means might own several mats of varying thickness and quality for different seasons and purposes. A good sleeping mat represented an investment of time and skill, whether crafted by the user's own hands or received as part of payment for service. In a society where most people owned relatively few personal possessions, a well-crafted sleeping mat might be among one's most important belongings. As night fully embraces the ancient landscape, imagine the interior of a typical worker's dwelling. By the flickering light of a simple oil lamp, perhaps just a dish of clay with a wick of twisted plant fiber floating in animal fat or vegetable oil, a family prepares for sleep. The reed mats are unrolled across sleeping platforms or directly on the ground, depending on the season and the home's construction. In more modest dwellings, these mats might cover a slightly raised area of the packed earth floor, designated specifically for sleeping. In larger or more prosperous homes, they would rest atop built-in benches of mud brick that ran along walls, creating defined sleeping spaces. What might surprise modern observers is that these seemingly simple sleeping arrangements were not unique to those in servitude or labor positions. While the pharaoh and highest nobility might sleep on wooden beds with elaborately carved supports shaped like lions or divine protectors, the basic sleeping surface, the reed mat, remained remarkably consistent across much of Egyptian society. The distinctions came in quality, quantity, and the additional elements that might accompany the basic mat. For higher status households, including those of skilled artisans or overseers, reed mats might be supplemented with cushions of linen stuffed with fibers, reeds, or occasionally wool. These served as primitive pillows, elevating the head during sleep, a practice with both practical and symbolic significance in Egyptian culture. The practical aspect related to keeping the face above the floor level where insects might roam during the night. The symbolic aspect connected to the importance of the head in Egyptian spiritual beliefs, the seat of identity and personhood that deserved special care and elevation. Archaeological evidence suggests that even agricultural workers and household servants used headrests, though theirs were likely made of wood, pottery, or even shaped mud brick, rather than the elaborate carved examples found in tombs of the wealthy. These simple objects perform the same essential function, preserving the dignity of the sleeper by elevating the head above the sleeping surface. The universality of this practice across social classes suggests a shared cultural value placed on proper sleep posture and the care of the head during vulnerable hours of rest. As the night deepens and the oil lamp is extinguished, sleep comes. To the inhabitants of the worker village, on their reed mats, bodies find the particular hollows and contours shaped by nightly use. These natural mattresses gradually customizing themselves to their owners through regular pressure and wear. Unlike modern mattresses designed to maintain a consistent shape, the reed mats of ancient Egypt adapted to their users, creating a uniquely personal sleeping surface that reflected the specific shape and sleeping habits of the individual. The coverings used on these reed sleeping surfaces varied with social status and climate. Simple linen sheets might be available to more prosperous workers and servants, while those of humbler means might sleep in the same garments they wore by day or use simple cloth coverings. During winter months, additional coverings became necessary, and perhaps woven blankets of plant fiber, or, for the more fortunate, woolen coverings imported from cooler regions or made from the wool of Egypt's limited sheep population. Animal skins, particularly goat, might serve as both mattress covers and blankets in colder weather, adding invaluable warmth during the desert nights when temperatures could drop dramatically. What did those in service positions dream of as they lay upon their reed mats in darkened dwellings? The Egyptian conception of dreams was complex and significant. They believed the Ba, something like the soul or personality, might wander during sleep, encountering messages from the divine or glimpses of possible futures. For household servants, sleeping within the homes of those they served, dreams might provide the only true privacy, interior experiences that remained their own regardless of physical constraints. For agricultural workers serving on temple estates or royal lands, dreams offered escape from physical fatigue and perhaps visions of better circumstances for their children, if not themselves. Evidence suggests that sleeping arrangements for those in service positions varied considerably depending on their specific role and the household they served. In larger elite households, certain servants might sleep near storage areas they were responsible for protecting, while others had designated sleeping quarters separate from the family areas. In more modest homes, household servants might sleep in the same main room as the family, their reed mats rolled out in designated areas when night fell. The archaeological record shows that in many worker communities, homes were small enough that all residents, family members and servants alike, shared the same sleeping space, their mats arranged according to family relationships and status. By midnight, when the moon rises high above the sleeping land of Egypt, an observer might notice how the simple reed mat served as the great equalizer in ancient Egyptian society. Though their days were defined by strict hierarchies of status and authority, in sleep, most Egyptians shared the same basic experience: the texture of woven reeds beneath their bodies, the subtle sounds of the material responding to movement, the particular smell of plant fibers warmed by body heat throughout the night. From servant to master, from field worker to artisan, The intimate experience of the sleeping surface transcended many of the boundaries that separated Egyptians during waking hours. For those brought to Egypt as captives from foreign campaigns, Nubians from the south, Asiatics from the northeast, adapting to Egyptian sleeping customs represented one aspect of cultural integration. Accustomed perhaps to different arrangements, in their homelands these individuals would learn to sleep Egyptian style on reed mats with head elevated. Archaeological evidence from sites where foreign workers lived shows this material acculturation. The adoption of Egyptian sleeping technologies alongside the maintenance of certain homeland traditions in other aspects of life. The simple reed mat became part of the process through which foreigners became integrated into Egyptian society over generations. As the night hours pass and the stars wheel overhead, the sleepers on their reed mats rest in preparation for another day of labor. For those in service positions, sleep represented not merely physical recovery, but a temporary release from obligation, hours when they answered to no one, when their time belonged fully to themselves, even if their waking hours belonged largely to others. In this way, the reed mat became a small territory of autonomy within systems of obligation and service, a personal space where even those with limited freedom could experience a measure of independence. The approaching dawn brings a stirring within the worker village. First, a few early risers, then gradually the entire community awakening to another day. Reed mats are rolled or folded and stored against walls or in corners, transforming sleeping spaces back into daytime living areas. This daily transformation of space represented one of the ingenious adaptations to limited dwelling size in ancient Egyptian households. The same area might serve as food preparation space during the day and sleeping quarters at night, the versatile reed mats enabling this dual functionality. As full daylight returns to the land of Egypt, we might reflect on what these humble, sleeping arrangements reveal about the lives of those in service positions in this ancient civilization. Far from the deprivation we might expect for those labeled as slaves by later historical traditions, the archaeological record shows reasonable comfort within the technological constraints of the time. The reed mat, simple yet effective, utilitarian yet often beautiful in its craftsmanship, embodied the Egyptian capability for creating practical solutions that served both physical needs and cultural values. The sun climbs higher, burning away the last traces of night's coolness. The reed beds along the Nile stir in the morning breeze, beginning another day of growth that will eventually yield more materials for the sleeping mats so central to Egyptian life. In this endless cycle of harvest and renewal, we see the sustainable wisdom of ancient Egyptian material culture, using what the environment provided abundantly, crafting it with skill and care, and creating objects that served essential human needs while reflecting cultural aesthetics and values. As we prepare to explore other aspects of daily life for those who served in ancient Egypt, let this understanding of their sleeping arrangements remain with us, not as exotic curiosity, but as window into lived experience. The people who slept upon these reed mats were not abstract historical categories, but individuals with bodies that grew tired, with minds that dreamed, with the universal human need for rest and recovery. In recognizing the care and ingenuity that went into creating comfortable sleeping surfaces, even for those of modest means, we glimpse a society more complex and humane than simplified narratives of ancient slavery might suggest. The reeds along the riverbank continue their gentle swaying, moving in patterns as old as Egypt itself. Like these resilient plants, bending with circumstance yet never breaking, finding nourishment even in difficult conditions, transforming simple elements into surprising strength through interconnection. The people who slept upon reed mats navigated their social circumstances with similar adaptability, finding dignity and comfort within systems of obligation we are still working to fully understand. The sun rises over the eastern horizon, its first golden rays stretching across the land like divine fingers, blessing the awakening world. In ancient Egyptian belief, this daily miracle represented the god Ra embarking on his celestial journey across the sky in his solar bark. For the common laborer in Egypt, whether free peasant farmer, conscripted worker, or household servant, this moment marked the beginning of another day of toil beneath the watchful eye of Horus. The divine protection that Egyptians believed extended over all who dwelled in the two lands. Imagine yourself standing on the roof of a simple, mud-brick dwelling in a worker's village as dawn breaks. The air is still cool from the night, but already holds the promise of the heat to come. All around you, similar flat-roofed homes press close together, connected by narrow, winding pathways, barely wide enough for two people to pass. From these humble dwellings emerge the men and women whose labor forms the foundation of Egyptian civilization, the farmers who tend the fields, the construction workers who build the monuments, the household servants who maintain the homes of the elite, and the countless others who perform the essential work that sustains society. The daily rhythm for these laborers began with this first light, their sleeping mats already rolled and stored against walls to transform night spaces back into day, rooms. In the soft morning light, families share simple breakfast meals, perhaps bread baked the previous evening, accompanied by beer, onions, or leftover vegetables from yesterday's dinner. This morning meal provides essential energy for the work ahead, taken quickly before departing for the day's labor. For household servants living within the homes they served, breakfast might be prepared for their masters first, with servants eating afterward from the same or similar foods depending on the household's customs and generosity. Archaeological evidence from worker villages tells us much about these morning routines. At Deir el-Medina, home to the artisans who created and decorated royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, excavated dwellings reveal small hearths where morning meals were prepared, storage jars that once held grains and dried goods, and the remnants of daily life, broken pottery, food residue, and the accumulated debris of generations. These humble artifacts speak of lives organized around work rhythms, of families adapting to the demands of service, to state, temple, or private household. As the sun climbs higher, workers disperse to their various duties. Field laborers head to agricultural lands along the Nile, construction workers to building sites, household servants to their duties within the homes of the wealthy. For those building the great monuments of Egypt, the temples, tombs, and palaces, work was organized with remarkable efficiency. Texts and artistic representations show crews divided into specialized teams, each focused on specific tasks: stone cutting, transport, carving, or painting. These teams received regular payments in the form of grain, beer, vegetables, and occasionally meat or fish, distributed at intervals recorded meticulously by scribes on papyrus and ostraca, pottery fragments used as writing surfaces. Under the ever-brightening eye of the sun, the labor continues through the morning hours. The work is demanding. Stones must be quarried and moved, fields plowed and planted, homes maintained, meals prepared, children tended. Yet evidence suggests that ancient Egyptian work rhythms included considerations for human endurance. Records from royal construction projects indicate regular break periods, with workers receiving water and sometimes beer at intervals throughout the day. During the hottest hours, when the sun stood directly overhead, many outdoor tasks would pause, allowing workers to seek shade and rest before resuming labor in the more tolerable late afternoon. For household servants, the day's pattern followed. The needs of the family they served Morning tasks might include fetching water from the river or local well, grinding grain for bread, preparing meals, cleaning living spaces, tending gardens, or caring for children. These duties, while physically demanding, often allowed for social interaction among servants working in the same household or neighborhood. Evidence from household inventories and tomb paintings suggests that servants with particular skills, cooking, weaving, childcare, or gardening, might specialize in these tasks, developing expertise that enhanced their value to the household and potentially improved their treatment and status. By midday, when the sun reaches its zenith and heat shimmers above the baked earth, work in fields and construction sites often pauses. In this hottest part of the day, laborers seek whatever shade is available, perhaps under reed canopies, erected specifically for this purpose, beneath the sparse shadows of palm trees, or in specially designated rest areas at larger work sites. Archaeological evidence from places like the Giza Plateau suggests dedicated spaces where workers could rest during these midday breaks, sometimes with access to water, food, and basic medical treatment for the inevitable injuries that accompanied heavy labor. This midday rest period, while practical necessity in Egypt's climate, also reveals something important about how laborers were viewed, not as machines to be worked until breakdown, but as human beings requiring certain concessions to their physical needs. Even in the grandest royal projects, with strict timelines and enormous pressure to complete the work, allowances were made for rest, refreshment, and recovery during the most challenging hours of the day. As the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, work resumes with renewed energy. The last major task block of the day might continue until the light begins to fade, making detailed work difficult or dangerous. For agricultural workers on temple or estate lands, the day's labor typically concluded with the recording of work completed, sometimes with immediate distribution of payment in the form of food supplies or credits toward other necessities. Those living in worker villages would return to their homes as evening approached, gathering again with family members who had dispersed to various work locations during the day. The archaeological record provides fascinating glimpses into these evening hours in worker communities. At sites like Kahun, built to house workers for the pyramid of Senusret II during the Middle Kingdom period, circa 2000-1700 BCE, excavations reveal remarkably standardized housing organized in orderly streets. Within these modest homes, evidence of evening activities emerges: cooking hearths with food residue, simple games carved into clay floors or wooden surfaces, damaged tools with signs of evening repair work, and the occasional luxury item, like a cosmetic palette or amulet, suggesting moments of personal care and adornment after the day's labor concluded. As twilight deepens into evening, oil lamps are kindled in worker dwellings, simple clay dishes with reed wicks floating in, vegetable oil or animal fat. These humble lights cast a soft golden glow, sufficient for essential evening activities, but conserving precious fuel. By this gentle illumination, families gather for the day's main meal, typically bread, accompanied by vegetables like onions, garlic, and leeks, perhaps enhanced with legumes for protein, and occasionally supplemented with small amounts of fish or meat during festivals or special occasions. Beer, the everyday drink of ancient Egyptians of all social classes, flows into simple cups, providing both hydration and mild intoxication at day's end. The evening meal represents more than simple nourishment. Archaeological and textual evidence suggests it formed an important social anchor in the daily rhythm. Families ate together, sharing not just food, but conversation about the day's events, community news, and plans for tomorrow's work. Even in the humblest households, this mealtime created space for reinforcing family bonds and passing cultural knowledge between generations. For household servants eating in the homes where they worked, similar community might form among the servant group, creating connections that help sustain them through the demands of service. As the evening progresses and darkness fully claims the land, preparation for sleep begins. Reed sleeping mats are unrolled across designated sleeping surfaces. Mud brick platforms built along walls in more substantial homes, or simply the packed earth floor in humbler dwellings. These mats, as we explored in our previous chapter, provided surprisingly comfortable sleeping surfaces through their natural flexibility and insulating properties. In many worker homes, the entire family would sleep in a single room, with parents and children arranged according to age and status, their mats placed in customary positions night after night. For household servants, sleeping arrangements varied, with the size and customs of the household they served. In larger, wealthier homes, servants might have designated sleeping areas separate from the family, perhaps in anteroom spaces. Near storerooms they were responsible for guarding, or in dedicated servant quarters in the largest estates. In more modest households, servants might sleep in the same main room as the family they served, their mats placed in less desirable locations, nearer to doors where drafts entered, further from warming hearths, or in areas with less protection from insects or other disturbances. Archaeological evidence from preserved domestic spaces reveals these sleeping arrangements through subtle clues. Worn areas on floors where mats were regularly placed, small niches in walls near sleeping platforms where personal items or protective amulets might rest during the night, or the remnants of wooden or stone headrests that elevated the sleeper's head during rest. These physical traces, combined with artistic representations in tomb paintings and textual descriptions, allow us to reconstruct the nightly experience of workers and servants in ancient Egypt with remarkable detail. As night deepens and the stars emerge in brilliant profusion above the darkened land, sleep comes to the weary laborers of Egypt. Under the gentle illumination of moonlight filtering through small window openings, or the roof access stairways common in Egyptian homes, bodies relax into the familiar embrace of reed mats, muscles easing after the day's exertions. The sounds of the night create a subtle lullaby. The distant murmur of the Nile, the occasional call of night birds, the soft breathing of family members or fellow servants sharing the sleeping space, the subtle rustlings of the dwelling itself, as mud brick walls release the heat of the day into the cooler night air. For many in service positions, these night hours represented the only true privacy they might experience, a time when their bodies and minds belonged fully to themselves, rather than to their work obligations. Dreams came to sleepers of all social stations, and Egyptian culture attributed special significance to these night visions. Believed to sometimes contain messages from deities or glimpses of possible futures, dreams were recorded, interpreted, and sometimes acted upon. For the common laborer or servant, dreams might offer temporary escape from physical limitations or glimpses of hopes for better circumstances in this life or the next. Archaeological evidence suggests that sleep in ancient Egypt was not always the uninterrupted 8-hour block familiar to modern expectations. Rather, patterns of segmented sleep may have been common, with people sleeping for several hours, then waking for a period of quiet activity. Conversation, intimacy between couples, tending to children or animals, or simply peaceful reflection in the night hours before returning to sleep until dawn. This natural rhythm, observed in many pre-industrial societies worldwide, aligned with the body's response to natural light cycles and may have provided important psychological benefits, allowing for processing of experiences and emotional regulation between sleep segments. With the first lightening of the eastern sky, the cycle begins anew. The Eye of Horus, the sun, returns to watch over Egypt's laborers for another day of toil and rest, work and connection, service and sustenance. The reed mats are rolled and stored, sleeping spaces transform back into living and working areas, and the daily pattern of labor resumes its familiar rhythm. This cyclical nature of time, daily, seasonal, and annual, provided structure and meaning to lives that modern perspectives might consider limited or constrained. As we contemplate these daily patterns of ancient Egyptian workers and servants, we might reflect on how their experience reveals the fundamentally human capacity to create meaning and find dignity within systems of obligation and service. The archaeological record shows not just the physical conditions of their lives, the modest dwellings, the simple but adequate food, the basic but comfortable sleeping arrangements, but hints at their interior experiences as well. Personal items found in worker dwellings, amulets, simple jewelry, crudely carved figurines, game pieces, musical instruments, speak to lives that encompassed more than mere labor, lives that included spiritual beliefs, aesthetic pleasures, social connections, and moments of leisure even within considerable constraints. Under the watchful eye of Horus, the ancient Egyptian laborer navigated a world defined by obligation yet not devoid of agency, by hierarchy, not without certain rights and protections, by physical demands yet also by cultural meanings that transcended mere subsistence. As we prepare to explore more specific aspects of their living conditions in subsequent chapters, this understanding of daily rhythm provides essential context, the beating heart of ordinary experience against which all other elements of life took shape and meaning. The sun continues its eternal journey across the Egyptian sky, as it has for countless millennia before human civilization arose along the Nile, and will continue long after our brief moment in time concludes. In the rhythm of its rising and setting, we find perhaps the most profound truth about the lives of those who labored in ancient Egypt, that amidst systems of obligation and service, the fundamental patterns of human experience remained constant. Bodies grew tired and required rest. Minds sought meaning beyond immediate circumstances. Hearts formed connections with others, sharing similar conditions, and souls reached toward transcendent understanding even from the most humble positions. In the great social pyramid of ancient Egypt, as the evening star appears in the darkening Egyptian sky, its gentle light reflecting off the quietly flowing Nile, the time for rest approaches in households both grand and humble throughout the two lands. The day's labor complete, bodies weary, from toil beneath the desert sun now turn toward the universal human necessity of sleep. Yet for the ancient Egyptians, particularly those in service positions, the transition from wakefulness to slumber involved practices and objects that might seem strange to our modern sensibilities. Perhaps none appears more puzzling or contradictory to our concept of comfort than the Egyptian headrest, a device often carved from wood, stone, or molded from clay that served as what we might call, with some hesitation, a pillow. Imagine yourself in a modest dwelling as night falls over ancient Egypt. The reed sleeping mat has been unrolled upon the designated sleeping area, perhaps a raised platform of mud brick along the wall, or simply a smooth section of the packed earth floor. But what awaits the weary head is not the soft yielding cushion we might expect. Instead, a curved wooden stand rising from a base to support a concave upper surface stands ready to cradle the sleeper's neck. This headrest, called wares in ancient Egyptian, appears in countless archaeological discoveries, from the simplest undecorated examples in worker dwellings to elaborate carved pieces inlaid with precious materials in royal tombs. The apparent paradox of the Egyptian headrest: how could something so unyielding possibly provide comfortable sleep? Reveals itself only when we understand the multiple purposes this ingenious device served. In practical terms, the headrest elevated the sleeper's head above the level of potential insect intrusions, a significant consideration in a river valley ecosystem teeming with various crawling life. It allowed air circulation around the head and neck, crucial in a hot climate where body heat and perspiration might otherwise create discomfort during sleep. For those who wore elaborate hairstyles or wigs, the headrest preserved these arrangements overnight, preventing the crushing and disarrangement that would occur with a soft pillow. Archaeological discoveries from worker villages provide fascinating insights into how these headrests varied across social classes. At sites like Deir el-Medina, home to skilled artisans who created royal tombs, excavations have revealed headrests ranging from simple functional designs to more elaborate examples, showing the craftspeople's artistic skills applied to their own possessions. Even in households of modest means, the headrest represented an important personal item, sometimes inscribed with protective symbols or brief hieroglyphic inscriptions wishing the owner peaceful sleep and good dreams. For those in service positions, household servants, agricultural workers on temple or estate lands, or conscripted laborers on royal projects, headrests might be simpler in design but followed the same essential principles. Archaeological evidence suggests that while the wealthy might own headrests carved from imported woods, alabaster, or even precious metals, those of lower social status created functional equivalents from local materials like sycamore wood, Nile, clay, or, in some cases, shaped mud brick. The universal presence of these objects across social classes indicates their importance in Egyptian sleep culture, regardless of one's position in the social hierarchy. Gradually, as one's body adjusted to this unique sleep technology, the headrest provided surprising comfort. The curved upper surface supported the neck precisely at the junction where cervical vertebrae meet the skull, allowing muscles to relax completely while maintaining proper spinal alignment. Modern experiments with reproductions of ancient Egyptian headrests suggest that after an adjustment period, this sleep posture can reduce certain types of neck and back pain and promote deeper sleep states. What appears uncomfortable to our modern expectations might in fact have provided more anatomically correct support than our soft, yielding pillows. Beyond their practical function, headrests held deep symbolic and spiritual significance in Egyptian culture. The hieroglyph for sleep and death closely resembled the headrest, creating a visual connection between nightly rest and the eternal sleep awaiting all mortals. Protective spells from the Book of the Dead were sometimes inscribed on headrests, transforming these humble objects into guardians of the sleeper during vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. Some headrests featured carvings of Bez or Taweret, protective household deities, their divine power invoked to watch over the sleeper and ward off nightmares or malevolent spiritual influences. As darkness deepens over our imagined ancient household, other elements of Egyptian sleep culture emerge. Despite the apparent hardness of the headrest, the overall sleep experience included surprising comforts. Archaeological evidence from various periods shows that Egyptians of means, including skilled workers and trusted household servants, might enhance their reed sleeping mats with layers of linen fabric, the same fine material used for clothing, prized for its coolness in summer and warming properties in winter. These linen sheets, ranging from coarse to extraordinarily fine, depending on one's status and resources, created a smoother surface between body and reed mat. The seasonal adaptability of Egyptian sleep arrangements reveals sophisticated understanding of environmental management. During summer months, when night temperatures remained high, sleeping might move to roof terraces where cooling breezes provided relief impossible to find indoors. In winter, when desert nights grew surprisingly cold, additional coverings appeared, perhaps woven blankets of plant fiber, woolen covers for those who could afford this relative luxury, or in humbler homes, additional layers of clothing or simple cloth. This seasonal migration and adaptation demonstrated the Egyptian genius for working with natural cycles rather than fighting against them. In larger households where multiple servants lived and worked, sleeping arrangements reflected the internal hierarchy among service staff. Senior servants, perhaps a trusted household steward or nursemaid who had served the family for years, might have designated sleeping spaces with superior appointments, including finer headrests, better quality mats, and even small storage boxes for personal belongings kept nearby during sleep. More recent additions to the household or those performing less valued tasks might sleep in less desirable locations, with simpler sleep equipment, though archaeological evidence suggests that basic provisions for comfortable rest extended to all but the most temporary household members. The material record from worker villages and servant quarters reveals another surprising aspect of ancient Egyptian sleep culture: the attention paid to sleep as a state requiring proper preparation and respect. Small cosmetic items found near sleeping areas suggest that even laborers and servants might perform abbreviated toilet rituals before sleep, perhaps applying oils to protect skin from the dry climate, using simple coal eye paint that served both decorative and medicinal purposes, reducing glare and fighting eye infections, or wearing protective amulets believed to promote restful sleep and ward off night dangers, physical or spiritual. As night fully embraces the Egyptian landscape, sleep comes to our imagined household. With head cradled in the curved embrace of the wooden headrest, body settled into the familiar contours of the reed sleeping mat, covered perhaps with a simple linen sheet, the Egyptian laborer drifts into the realm of dreams. Egyptian texts speak of sleep as a state similar to death, yet restorative rather than final. A little death from which one would return refreshed with the morning sun. During these vulnerable hours, protective deities were believed to stand guard, particularly Bes and Taweret, whose images frequently appeared on household items associated with sleep and regeneration. Dreams held special significance in ancient Egyptian culture, considered potential messages from divine realms or glimpses of possible futures. For those in service positions, dreams might offer rare moments of expanded possibility, experiences of agency or adventure beyond their waking limitations. Dream interpretation formed an important part of Egyptian spiritual practice, with certain priests specializing in analyzing the symbolic content of night visions. While common laborers might not have access to such formal interpretation, folk traditions provided frameworks for understanding significant dreams, creating systems of meaning that helped integrate these night experiences into waking life. The archaeological record occasionally provides touching personal glimpses into the sleep experiences of ordinary Egyptians. A headrest from Deir el-Medina bears a simple inscription, "For the good sleep of Neferhotep." A linen sheet fragment preserved in the dry climate shows careful mending, suggesting its importance to the owner who extended its life through repair rather than replacement. A small wooden box found near a sleeping platform contained a clay amulet of Bez alongside a lock of hair, perhaps a protective charm incorporating a loved one's essence to guard the sleeper through the night. As we reflect on these sleep practices, the apparent contradiction between the hard surface of the headrest and the concept of comfortable sleep resolves itself. The Egyptian approach to sleep focused not on softness as we understand it, but on proper support, practical adaptations to climate, protection from environmental hazards, and spiritual safety during vulnerable hours. These priorities created a sleep system perfectly adapted to local conditions and cultural beliefs, perhaps no less comfortable than our own, once one adjusted to its particular characteristics. For household servants, sleeping within the homes they served, or laborers, resting in worker villages, the fundamental experience of sleep transcended social boundaries despite variations in luxury and appointment. The basic technology, reed mat, headrest, seasonal coverings, remained consistent across social classes, with differences appearing in material quality and decorative elements rather than functional design. This consistency suggests recognition of sleep as a universal human need requiring certain basic provisions regardless of one's social position. Archaeological evidence from sites like Amarna, Deir el-Medina, and Kahun reveals that sleep areas in ancient Egyptian homes, even modest ones, were often treated with special care. Floors in these sections show more frequent replastering or smoothing. Walls sometimes bear traces of simple decoration, and these spaces typically occupy positions maximizing comfortable airflow while minimizing disturbance. The universal importance of restorative sleep was clearly recognized on a practical level, even for those whose waking hours were largely determined by service obligations to others. As the night hours pass and the stars wheel overhead, sleep cycles through its natural rhythms in our imagined ancient household. Perhaps, as some scholars suggest, the ancient Egyptian sleep pattern followed the segmented model common to pre-industrial societies worldwide. A first sleep of several hours, then a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle night, followed by a second sleep lasting until dawn. This pattern, aligned with natural darkness cycles, allowed for periods of peaceful reflection or gentle activity in the midnight hours, moments of privacy particularly valuable for those whose daylight hours were heavily structured by work obligations. With the first lightening of the eastern sky, sleep draws to its natural conclusion. The household begins to stir, headrests are set aside, and reed mats rolled for storage until the next night's rest. The day's activities begin anew, bodies refreshed by the night's restoration, despite what modern observers might consider the strange contradiction of the stone or wooden pillow that cradled dreams through the dark hours. As the risen sun casts its golden light across the awakening land, we might reflect on how these ancient sleep practices remind us of human adaptability, our remarkable capacity to create comfort and meaning within the constraints of available materials and knowledge. The Egyptian laborer or servant, resting head on carved wood or shaped stone, likely experienced their sleep arrangements not as deprivation, but simply as the natural and proper way to prepare for slumber. Their bodies adapted to this system, just as ours have adapted to very different sleep technologies. In this understanding, we find perhaps the most important insight about the lives of those who served in ancient Egypt. That subjective experience cannot be simply read from material conditions as they might appear to outside observers. What seems uncomfortable to us might have provided perfect comfort to those whose bodies and expectations were shaped by different cultural and environmental realities. The stone pillows of ancient Egypt, far from representing hardship, showcase remarkable ingenuity in creating appropriate solutions to the universal human need for restorative sleep. Dear listeners, as we pause midway through our exploration of ancient Egyptian sleep and service, let these thoughts of night's restoration carry you toward your own peaceful slumber. Like the ancient Egyptians who found perfect rest with head elevated on carved wood or stone, may you too find the ideal position for surrender to sleep's embrace. The stars that watched over ancient dreamers still shine down upon us, connecting our rest to theirs across the vast expanse of time. Close your eyes now if they grow heavy, and know that in sleep we share an experience as ancient as humanity itself, transcending the boundaries of time, culture, and circumstance in the universal language of dreams. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the land of Egypt and painting the surface of the great river in shimmering gold. For over 5,000 years, the Nile has been much more than a mere waterway. To the people dwelling along its banks, It has been the pulsing heart of their civilization, the source of life in an otherwise harsh desert landscape, and the central organizing principle around which all aspects of Egyptian society, including the patterns of sleep and shelter, have been arranged. For those in service positions, from household servants to agricultural workers, from construction laborers to temple attendants, the river's annual rhythm dictated not just their working lives, but their most intimate daily experiences, including where and how they slept. Imagine yourself standing on the riverbank as evening approaches, watching the gradual transition from day to night. The Nile flows before you, broad and majestic, carrying not just water, but the fertile silt that will renew the fields after the annual flood. Along its banks, settlements have developed according to patterns established thousands of years earlier, positioned carefully to balance access to the life-giving water with protection from its destructive potential during flood season. This strategic placement represents the first way the river shaped shelter for all Egyptians, including those in service positions, determining where communities could safely exist and thrive within the narrow habitable corridor along the river's course. As darkness begins to gather, consider how profoundly the Nile influenced the living and sleeping arrangements of ancient Egyptians through its annual cycle of flood, recession, and drought. This cycle, so reliable it served as the basis for the Egyptian calendar, created three distinct seasons: Akhet, inundation; Pere, growing season; and Shemu, harvest and low water. Each season brought different requirements for shelter, different patterns of labor, and consequently different sleeping arrangements for those who served in various capacities within Egyptian society. During Akhet, when the Nile rose dramatically between June and September, flooding the adjacent plains with water and nutrient-rich silt, agricultural work became impossible. This period saw temporary shifts in labor patterns, with field workers often reassigned to construction projects, craft production, or other tasks that could continue during the inundation. Archaeological evidence from worker villages shows that during this season, population density in permanent settlements often increased as temporary agricultural shelters became uninhabitable and workers concentrated in elevated communities safe from floodwaters. This seasonal concentration had direct impacts on sleeping arrangements for many in service positions. Records from temple estates and royal work projects indicate that during inundation, sleeping quarters often became more crowded, with spaces designed for smaller numbers, accommodating additional workers temporarily relocated from flooded areas. Sleeping platforms that might normally serve a single family unit could be shared by extended relations or unrelated workers during these months, creating more communal sleeping arrangements. The shared body heat in these more densely populated sleeping areas provided welcome warmth during what were, perhaps surprisingly to modern perspectives, some of the cooler months in Egypt due to increased humidity and water evaporation. As night fully embraces the land and stars begin to appear in the indigo sky, consider how the river influenced not just where people slept, but the very materials of their sleeping surfaces. The Nile's banks provided the reeds and rushes used to create sleeping mats, harvested from vast wetlands that formed productive ecosystems alongside the main river channel. These plant materials, renewable with each year's growth cycle, represented a sustainable resource that allowed even those of modest means to create comfortable sleeping surfaces. The timing of reed harvesting followed the river's rhythm, with certain species collected during specific water levels to optimize their quality for mat making and other practical uses. For those serving in agricultural roles on temple or estate, land's sleeping arrangements often shifted seasonally with the river's cycle. During planting and harvest seasons, temporary field shelters allowed workers to remain close to distant fields rather than making long daily journeys from permanent Villages. Archaeological investigations have revealed these simple structures, sometimes little more than reed lean-tos or basic mud brick shelters, containing evidence of overnight stays including simple sleeping mats, cooking hearths, and occasionally headrests or other personal items carried between permanent and temporary dwellings. This seasonal migration between sleeping locations represented another way the river's rhythm directed the most intimate aspects of daily life for agricultural workers. Household servants, whose duties remained relatively consistent regardless of the Nile's cycle, generally experienced more stable sleeping arrangements, yet even their rest was indirectly influenced by the river's patterns. The design of Egyptian homes, from humble dwellings to elite estates, responded directly to the climate conditions created by the Nile Valley. Thick mud brick walls made from the river's clay mixed with straw maintained relatively stable interior temperatures despite external fluctuations. Roof terraces provided alternative sleeping spaces during the hottest months, while interior rooms offered protection during cooler periods or dust storms. These architectural adaptations, shaped by millennia of experience with the river valley's specific climate conditions, created the physical context for sleep regardless of social status. The river provided not just the setting and materials for shelter, but also influenced the very timing of sleep itself. Egyptian work patterns generally began early in the morning, when temperatures were cooler, sometimes paused during the most intense midday heat, and continued until dusk. This schedule, adapted to the specific climate conditions of the river valley, meant that sleep typically began shortly after nightfall, perhaps between 8 and 9 in the evening by our modern reckoning, and concluded with the first light of dawn around 5 or 6 in the morning. These sleep times remained relatively consistent throughout the year, with the duration of sleep expanding somewhat during winter months when nights were longer. Archaeological evidence from worker villages provides fascinating insights into how sleeping spaces adapted to the river's seasonal influence. At Deir el Medina, home to skilled artisans who created and decorated royal tombs during the New Kingdom period, houses featured roof terraces accessed by interior staircases. These terraces served as sleeping areas during summer months when interior spaces retained too much heat for comfortable rest. Similar features appear in humbler dwellings as well, suggesting that even those of modest means understood and adapted to seasonal temperature variations through vertical movement within their homes, sleeping indoors during winter and outdoors during summer following the rhythm established by the river's cycle. The Nile's influence extended even to the direction and orientation of sleep. Traditional Egyptian dwellings were often designed to capture prevailing north winds for natural cooling. Sleeping platforms or areas were typically positioned to benefit from this air movement, with openings carefully placed to create cross-ventilation. This architectural response to the specific wind patterns of the Nile Valley meant that regardless of social status, Egyptians typically oriented their sleeping positions to optimize comfort within these airflow patterns. For those in service positions who might have less control over their sleeping environments, adapting to the established orientation of designated sleep spaces represented another way the river indirectly shaped their rest. As midnight approaches and the household settles into deeper sleep, consider how the sounds of the river valley created the auditory landscape for ancient Egyptian slumber. The Nile itself provided a constant, subtle background, the gentle lapping of water against banks, the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface, the rustling of reeds and papyrus in night breezes. These natural sounds, consistent yet ever-changing in their detail, formed a soothing soundscape that likely influenced sleep quality for generations of Egyptians. Even for those not sleeping within immediate hearing distance of the main channel, the river-dependent ecosystem created specific night sounds, from insects to birds to small mammals. that would have been intimately familiar to sleepers of all social classes. The river's influence extended to the very economy that determined who served whom in Egyptian society. The predictable fertility created by the annual inundation generated agricultural surplus that supported specialized labor, including domestic service. Estates with more productive land holdings could support larger servant populations with better provisions, including superior sleeping arrangements. Temple complexes, sustained by vast agricultural estates gifted by pharaohs or wealthy donors, maintained substantial service staff with sleeping quarters that reflected the temple's prosperity. In this way, the river's bounty indirectly determined the quality of life, including sleep, for those in various service positions throughout Egyptian society. Perhaps most profoundly, the Nile shaped Egyptian spiritual beliefs about sleep and dreams. The river's daily renewal with the dawn and its annual cycle of death and rebirth during the inundation became powerful metaphors for human experience, including sleep. Egyptian texts describe sleep as a little death from which one returns, refreshed just as the land appeared to die during drought only to be reborn with the flood. Dreams were understood as journeys of the BA, soul or personality, during sleep, perhaps traveling along spiritual waterways just as boats traversed the physical Nile. These beliefs influenced sleep practices for all Egyptians, including the use of protective amulets, headrests inscribed with spiritual texts, and evening prayers or rituals to ensure safe passage through the vulnerable hours of unconsciousness. As the deepest hours of night pass and the first hint of dawn approaches in the eastern sky, imagine how the river's rhythm would begin to stir sleeping households of all social levels back to wakefulness. The natural increase in bird activity along the Nile before first light, a phenomenon consistent in river ecosystems worldwide, likely served as a natural alarm, gradually drawing sleepers back to consciousness. This biological signal established by the river's ecosystem aligned human sleep patterns with the optimal times for beginning daily activities, particularly during hot seasons when early morning work offered the most comfortable conditions. Archaeological evidence from various periods of Egyptian history reveals how sleeping arrangements for service staff evolved alongside changing relationships with the river. During the Old Kingdom, when centralized control of the Nile's irrigation was a key aspect of royal power, servant quarters in elite households typically occupied designated areas with relatively standardized provisions. As water management became more localized in later periods, with regional authorities taking greater responsibility for irrigation systems, servant accommodations show more variation between different regions of Egypt, suggesting more localized customs developing in response to specific conditions along different stretches of the river. The river's influence appears even in the most intimate aspects of sleep for those in service positions, the materials of their bedding. Beyond the reed sleeping mats we've explored previously, evidence suggests that servants in prosperous households might have access to pillows or cushions stuffed with reeds, linen scraps, or even occasionally with seeds or dried flowers from river-dependent plants. While elite Egyptians might enjoy pillows filled with more luxurious materials like down or imported plant fibers, the river provided accessible alternatives that offered reasonable comfort for those of more modest status. As full daylight returns to the land of Egypt, and sleeping households stir to begin another day of activity, reflect on how completely the Nile River shaped every aspect of life, including sleep, for those who dwelled in its valley. From the macro patterns of settlement and seasonal labor to the micro details of sleeping surfaces and preferred orientations for rest, the river's presence infused every experience. For those in service positions whose lives were directed significantly by others' requirements, the river represented perhaps the most fundamental organizing principle, establishing rhythms that transcended even the social hierarchies that determined their daily duties. In understanding how profoundly the Nile shaped sleep for ancient Egyptians of all social levels, we gain deeper insight into a civilization that responded to environmental realities with remarkable adaptability and ingenuity. Rather than fighting against natural cycles or attempting to overcome them through technology, ancient Egyptians, from pharaohs to servants, developed lifestyles that aligned with the river's rhythms. Sleeping patterns, like so many other aspects of daily life, evolved to harmonize with rather than resist the environmental conditions created by the river's annual cycle. For household servants, field workers, construction laborers, and others in service positions, this harmony with the river's rhythm provided certain comforts and protections, even within systems of obligation and hierarchy. The Nile dictated aspects of life that transcended social distinctions, creating shared experiences of seasonal change, natural beauty, and environmental challenge that connected all Egyptians regardless of status. In the universal human experience of sleep, perhaps we find the most profound evidence of this connection. All bodies, from the highest to the most humble, surrendering to rest beneath the same star-filled sky, beside the same flowing waters that had sustained countless generations before, and would continue long after individual lives had passed into the eternal sleep that awaited all mortals. As we conclude this exploration of how the Nile shaped sleep and shelter for ancient Egyptians in service positions, the river continues its timeless journey toward the Mediterranean, carrying the silty evidence of distant mountains to create new land at its delta, a perfect embodiment of the cyclical, yet ever-changing nature of existence itself. In this eternal flow we glimpse perhaps the deepest truth about sleep in ancient Egypt, that even within systems of service and obligation, the river provided rhythms that synchronized human experience with natural cycles larger than any social hierarchy, connecting all who dwelled within its valley to patterns as ancient as the land itself. As evening shadows lengthen across the ancient landscape, the worker village of Deir el-Medina grows quiet. The narrow streets between tightly packed mud brick homes empty as families retreat indoors for the night's rest. Unlike our modern expectations of private bedrooms and individual sleeping spaces, the coming hours will unfold in shared spaces where proximity and community define the experience of night as surely as they shape the daylight hours. For workers, servants, and those in various service positions throughout ancient Egypt, sleep was rarely a solitary affair but rather a communal experience embedded within family and household structures. Picture yourself standing in the central room of a modest worker's home as twilight fades into darkness. The house, like most in this planned community built to house skilled artisans working on royal tombs during the New Kingdom period, consists of a few carefully organized spaces. Perhaps 4 rooms total, arranged in a linear pattern from the street entrance toward the back wall. Archaeological excavations at sites like Deir el-Medina, Amarna, and Kahun reveal remarkably consistent domestic layouts despite spanning different periods of Egyptian history, suggesting that certain fundamental aspects of daily life, including sleeping arrangements, followed established patterns across centuries. As night fully claims the land, oil lamps are lit within the dwelling, simple clay vessels with floating wicks that cast a soft golden glow against white-plastered walls, occasionally decorated with religious scenes or geometric patterns. By this gentle illumination, the household prepares for sleep. Reed mats are unrolled across designated sleeping surfaces, mud brick platforms built along walls or in some cases in a separated rear room, specifically intended for sleeping. These permanent sleeping platforms, ranging from 6 to 7 feet in length and about 3 feet wide, were typically raised approximately 1 foot above the floor level, high enough to avoid ground-dwelling insects and cooler air that settled at floor level, yet not so high as to be difficult to access. What makes these sleeping arrangements distinctly communal is their capacity and usage. Archaeological evidence, supported by artistic representations and textual records, indicates that these platforms typically accommodated multiple sleepers, often an entire nuclear family sharing a single raised surface. Parents would sleep alongside children, with the youngest frequently placed between adults for warmth and protection. In households including extended family members, perhaps aging parents or unmarried siblings, the sleeping arrangements might extend to include additional platforms in the same room or utilize the central living space for overflow sleepers on rolled-out mats. For those in service positions within larger households, sleeping arrangements followed similar communal patterns with variations reflecting status differences. Trusted household servants might have designated sleeping areas, perhaps a small side room or alcove, offering some separation from the family they served, though rarely the complete privacy expected in modern accommodations. Lower status servants or temporary workers might simply unroll sleeping mats in common areas of the home after the day's activities concluded, creating nighttime sleeping spaces in rooms used for daytime purposes. Archaeological evidence from larger estates occasionally reveals dedicated servant quarters, though even these typically featured shared sleeping platforms rather than individual spaces. As the household settles towards sleep in our imagined dwelling, notice how the arrangement of bodies follows subtle but meaningful patterns. The highest status individual, typically the senior male in family settings, often occupied the most protected position, furthest from entrances where drafts or potential intruders might disturb rest. Children were frequently positioned between adults, benefiting from shared warmth, while also allowing parents to monitor their youngest through the night. In servant quarters, similar hierarchical arrangements might place senior servants in preferred sleeping locations, with newer or lower status individuals assigned less desirable positions, nearer to doors or further from warming hearths during cooler seasons. The practical advantages of these communal sleeping arrangements become apparent as night deepens. Body heat shared among multiple sleepers provided essential warmth during winter nights when temperatures in the desert environment could drop dramatically. During summer, the proximity allowed for shared protection from insects through collective use of simple nets or coverings. Throughout the year, the arrangement offered security. Multiple waking adults could respond to emergencies, from external threats to medical issues, while the natural stirrings of different sleepers throughout the night maintained a level of awareness impossible for a solitary sleeper. Beyond these practical benefits, communal sleeping created social and psychological supports, particularly valuable for those in service positions. For household servants living within the homes they served, nighttime often brought reunion with family members serving in the same household, but assigned to different daytime tasks. Archaeological evidence from larger estates suggests that servant families were often kept intact when possible, recognizing the stability this created for both the servants themselves and the households they served. The evening hours provided opportunity for quiet conversation, for sharing information and experiences, for maintaining family bonds despite daytime separation. As midnight approaches in our imagined worker dwelling, consider how the sounds of communal sleep created a distinctive nocturnal soundtrack. The rhythmic breathing of multiple sleepers, occasional shifting of positions on reed mats, perhaps the soft murmur of brief exchanges between those awakening temporarily, these created an auditory landscape profoundly different from the silence expected in modern individual sleeping spaces. Far from being considered disturbing, these sounds likely provided reassurance of continued community presence through vulnerable hours of darkness. Archaeological evidence from worker villages reveals intriguing adaptations to these communal sleeping arrangements. Some homes show evidence of simple dividing structures, perhaps reed screens or hanging textiles, that could provide modest visual separation within shared sleeping spaces while maintaining the practical benefits of proximity. These adaptations appear more commonly in homes of skilled workers with slightly greater resources, suggesting that even as some degree of privacy might be desired, the fundamental pattern of communal sleep remained consistent across social levels. The shared nature of sleep extended beyond individual households to the broader design of worker communities. At sites like Deir el-Medina, houses shared walls with neighboring dwellings, creating continuous rows of connected structures. The practical effect of this arrangement meant that sleepers often rested with only a thin, mud brick wall separating them from neighbors' sleeping areas. Sound would travel between these adjacent spaces, creating a larger communal sleep environment where the activities of neighboring households might be faintly perceived. Rather than considering this lack of acoustic isolation problematic, evidence suggests ancient Egyptians viewed this connectivity as normal and possibly beneficial, creating broader community awareness that extended through day and night. For all temporary workers engaged in major construction projects, building pyramids, temples, or palaces, communal sleeping reached its most extensive expression. Archaeological excavations at sites like Giza have revealed barrack-style accommodations where dozens of workers shared large sleeping halls during project periods. These spaces, while basic, show evidence of organization and provision for reasonable comfort. Raised sleeping platforms, hearths for warmth during cooler seasons, and sometimes cooking areas attached to the sleeping quarters. The temporary nature of these accommodations did not preclude attention to proper sleep conditions, recognizing that well-rested workers performed better regardless of their social status. As the depth of night continues in our imagined worker village, consider how communal sleep influenced dreamscapes and night awareness. Egyptian beliefs about dreams, that they might contain messages from deities or the dead, glimpses of possible futures, or solutions to waking problems, took shape within this context of shared sleep. Dreams recounted in the morning became community property discussed and interpreted collectively rather than remaining entirely private experiences. For those in service positions whose waking hours were largely directed by others' requirements, dreams represented an interior space of comparative freedom. Yet even these experiences were typically shared through recounting and discussion, becoming part of communal rather than strictly individual identity. While communal sleep was the norm, archaeological evidence occasionally reveals specialized sleeping arrangements that modified this pattern for specific circumstances. In households where someone suffered from illness, temporary sleeping separations might be arranged with physical evidence showing mats placed in unusual locations during periods of contagion. Pregnant women nearing delivery might be provided more spacious sleeping arrangements, sometimes in specially prepared areas with particular protective amulets or decorative elements referencing Taweret, the protective deity of childbirth. These adaptations show that while the communal pattern provided the foundation, Egyptian households maintained flexibility to address special circumstances. For servants and workers attached to temple complexes, sleep sometimes took on additional sacred dimensions. Archaeological investigation of living quarters associated with temples reveals sleeping areas occasionally oriented toward sacred spaces or decorated with religious imagery specifically chosen to influence dreams. Written records mention dream incubation practices where individuals might sleep in designated sacred areas specifically to receive divine guidance through dreams. While primarily associated with priests and temple personnel, evidence suggests that even service workers in temple context might participate in modified versions of these practices, creating a distinctive spiritual dimension to their sleep experiences. The communal nature of ancient Egyptian sleep created particular dynamics around intimacy and sexuality. artistic representations and textual evidence suggest that marital sexual relations typically occurred within these shared sleeping spaces, with cultural practices developing to provide a measure of privacy through timing, often during afternoon rest periods when fewer people were present, or through mutual community understanding about averting attention at appropriate moments. For servants and workers, these same community customs facilitated intimate relationships despite limited physical privacy, a reminder that human ingenuity adapts to create necessary social spaces even within apparent constraints. Archaeological evidence reveals how communal sleep adapted to Egypt's climate cycles. During the hottest months, sleeping might move outdoors to roof terraces or courtyards where cooler night air provided relief impossible to find indoors. These seasonal migrations maintained the communal pattern while adjusting its location, with family or household groups moving together to these alternative sleeping spaces. The physical evidence of these practices appears in the design of worker homes, which typically included access stairs to flat roof areas suitable for group sleeping during appropriate seasons. As the night begins to wane and the first hints of dawn approach in the eastern sky, imagine how this community of sleepers gradually returns to wakefulness. Unlike our modern expectation of alarm clocks creating abrupt transitions, awakening in ancient Egyptian households unfolded gradually, with early risers beginning daily activities while others continued resting. This staggered pattern of awakening, visible in the archaeological record through the placement of morning use items in relation to sleeping platforms, created natural transitions between sleep and activity states. For servants and workers, this gradual awakening allowed for adjustment to the coming day's demands within the supportive context of community presence. The communal sleeping arrangements of ancient Egyptian workers and servants carried important developmental benefits for children raised within these systems. Growing up, sleeping alongside family members and perhaps household servants, children absorbed cultural knowledge through proximity, overhearing adult conversations, observing responses to night disturbances, learning appropriate behavior through constant modeling. This immersive educational environment, far from the isolated childhood sleep spaces common in many modern societies, integrated younger generations into community knowledge and practice through the shared vulnerability and intimacy of communal rest. As full daylight returns to our imagined worker village and sleeping mats are rolled to transform night spaces back to daytime functions, consider how these communal sleep patterns reflected and reinforced core values of ancient Egyptian society. The emphasis on community over individuality, on shared experience over private ownership, on collective security over personal isolation. These fundamental social orientations found perfect expression in the nightly gathering of bodies in shared rest. For those in service positions whose lives were defined significantly by obligations to others, these communal sleep patterns provided essential connection and belonging that balanced the hierarchical aspects of daytime experience. Archaeological evidence from across different periods of Egyptian history shows remarkable consistency in these communal sleep arrangements despite other social and technological changes. From Old Kingdom worker communities to New Kingdom artisan villages, from Middle Kingdom planned settlements to later period urban developments, the basic pattern of shared sleeping spaces persists across thousands of years of Egyptian civilization. This continuity suggests that communal sleep served deep-seated human needs within Egyptian culture, needs that transcended changes in political structure, religious practice, or economic organization. As we conclude our exploration of communal sleep in worker villages and servant quarters, we might reflect on how profoundly different this experience was from our modern expectations of sleep as a primarily private and individual activity. For ancient Egyptians in service positions, sleep was embedded within community, inseparable from the relationships that defined their waking lives. In understanding this difference, we gain deeper insight not just into sleeping arrangements, but into a fundamentally different way of conceptualizing the self in relation to others, a perspective where individual identity remained always in conversation with community belonging, where even in the vulnerability of sleep, one remained part of a collective rather than truly alone. The sun now illuminates the worker village fully, transforming shadow to light, night to day. The spaces that held communal dreams return to their daytime functions, but the connections forged and maintained through shared sleep continue to shape the interactions of all who dwelled within these walls. For servants, workers, and all those who served in ancient Egypt, these nightly gatherings provided essential human connection that transcended the hierarchies of waking hours. A reminder that in sleep, as in death, certain fundamental human experiences unite us across all distinction of status, wealth, or power. The full moon rises above the great temple of Karnak, its silver light streaming down upon monumental pylons and colossal statues, casting shadows that stretch like dark fingers across the sacred precinct. As the bustle of day gives way to the quiet of evening, a different rhythm emerges for those who serve in the shadow of Egypt's temples. While most of the population prepares for rest, certain temple servants begin specialized night duties, creating sleep patterns distinctly different from those of agricultural workers or household servants. In exploring these varied sleep cycles, we discover how time itself was understood and experienced differently by those in different service positions throughout ancient Egypt. Imagine yourself standing in the outer courtyard of a great temple complex as the last light of day fades. The massive stone structures, which appeared solid and unchanging in daylight, now seem to shift and breathe in the gathering darkness, their shadows moving almost imperceptibly as the moon continues its ascent. Unlike private homes or palaces, which largely shut down their activities with nightfall, temples maintained continuous operation through day and night cycles, requiring specialized service staff with carefully scheduled sleep patterns to maintain this perpetual functioning. Temple servants followed sleep cycles coordinated with ritual requirements rather than simply aligning with solar patterns. Inscriptions and papyri recording temple operations reveal complex staffing systems organized into phyli, rotating groups of priests and support staff who would serve for specific periods, typically 1 month at a time, followed by 3 months, of regular life outside the temple before their service rotation returned. This system required those on active temple duty to adapt their sleep patterns to ritual schedules that often included nighttime ceremonies, pre-dawn preparations, and carefully timed observances that might disrupt conventional sleep cycles. Archaeological evidence from priests' quarters and service staff accommodations adjacent to major temples shows sleeping arrangements designed to facilitate these specialized patterns. Rooms designated for rest often feature sound-dampening architectural elements, thicker walls, strategic placement away from areas of nighttime activity, or orientation toward quieter exterior spaces. These adaptations recognize the need for quality sleep during unconventional hours, particularly for those whose service rotations required them to rest during daylight periods when most of the population was active. As night deepens over the temple precinct, different categories of service personnel begin their specialized activities. Certain priests and high-ranking servants prepare for nighttime rituals that require precise astronomical observations, tracking the movement of stars and constellations that Egyptian religion associated with specific deities. Lower-ranking temple servants clean sacred spaces, prepare ritual implements, or stand watch over sacred areas, all while maintaining reverent quiet appropriate to nighttime in sacred precincts. These nocturnal duties required some temple servants to adopt polyphasic sleep patterns, taking multiple shorter sleep periods throughout the 24-hour cycle rather than a single consolidated night's rest. The Waybet, pure place, where mummification procedures were performed, represents another temple-associated space with distinctive sleep requirements for its service personnel. The complex process of mummification took place over a 70-day period, with certain stages requiring continuous attention, including night monitoring. Administrative texts mention watchers of the night assigned to these facilities who maintained vigilance over bodies in preparation while other staff slept, creating rotating sleep schedules among the specialized servants of the waybed. Archaeological evidence from these facilities occasionally reveals small side rooms with sleeping platforms, allowing staff to rest in close proximity to their charges. For agricultural workers serving on temple estates, vast landholdings that supported temple operations through their produce, sleep patterns followed different rhythms tied to seasonal agricultural cycles. During critical planting and harvest periods, these workers might adopt temporary sleep adjustments to maximize productive hours, perhaps rising well before dawn and taking compensatory rest during the hottest midday hours when outdoor labor became difficult. During the inundation season, when agricultural work became impossible, sleep patterns might return to more conventional night-centered cycles, with temple estate workers taking on alternative duties with different time demands. By midnight, as the moon reaches its zenith, imagine the temple complex as a landscape of varied states of consciousness. Some servants alert and engaged in essential night duties, others in deep sleep recovering from day activities, still others transitioning between sleep and wakefulness as their scheduled duties approach. This complex choreography of rest and activity ensured that sacred spaces received continuous attention while still allowing human servants to meet their biological need for sufficient sleep over each complete day-night cycle. The Egyptian understanding of sleep itself took specific forms within temple contexts. Hieroglyphic texts describe sleep not merely as physical rest, but as a distinctive state of consciousness during which humans might connect with divine realms. For temple servants, whose work placed them in continuous proximity to sacred spaces, sleep took on additional significance as potential divine communication. Dream accounts from temple contexts reveal how seriously these night experiences were taken, carefully recorded, analyzed by specialized interpreters, and sometimes used to inform temple activities or rituals. Archaeological investigations of sleep spaces associated with temples have occasionally revealed interesting artifacts that suggest specialized sleep practices for temple servants. Small headrests carved with protective symbols associated with specific temple deities, votive offerings placed near sleeping areas, or amulets designed specifically to ensure safe sleep in sacred precincts, all indicate that rest for temple servants carried distinctive spiritual dimensions beyond ordinary sleep. These objects remind us that for ancient Egyptians, sleep represented vulnerability requiring divine protection, particularly for those sleeping in proximity to powerfully sacred spaces. As the night hours progress, another category of temple-associated personnel maintained alert wakefulness, the security staff responsible for protecting valuable temple treasuries, granaries, and sacred objects. These guards followed carefully planned sleep rotations, with archaeological evidence from guard posts showing multiple sleeping platforms used in sequence rather than simultaneously, allowing continuous security presence while still meeting individual sleep requirements. Administrative texts mention specific penalties for guards found sleeping during assigned watch periods, indicating the seriousness with which these security duties were regarded. The first hints of approaching dawn bring increased activity within the temple complex. Certain rituals required precise timing, coordinated with the first appearance of morning light, necessitating pre-dawn wakefulness for specific temple servants. Archaeological evidence from temple approach paths sometimes reveals small structures that might have served as rest spaces for those with pre-dawn duties, allowing them to sleep near their posts rather than risking late arrival from more distant dwellings. The quality of these rest accommodations varied with the status of the servant, with higher-ranking ritual specialists enjoying more comfortable sleeping quarters than ordinary support staff. Outside the main temple precinct, in communities that developed around major religious centers, sleep patterns for service workers showed interesting adaptations to proximity to sacred spaces. Houses excavated in these communities sometimes reveal orientation of sleeping areas away from temples, rather than toward them, perhaps allowing inhabitants to rest without disturbance from nighttime religious activities. Unlike the precisely scheduled sleep of temple staff on active duty, these surrounding service communities maintained more conventional sleep patterns aligned with solar cycles, creating a buffer zone of normal activity patterns around the specialized rhythms of the temple itself. For the highest status temple servants, including lector priests who recited sacred texts and ritual specialists who performed the most sacred ceremonies, sleep accommodations reflected their elevated position. Archaeological excavations have revealed more spacious sleeping quarters for these individuals, sometimes with decorative elements featuring protective deities associated with sleep and dreaming. These physical spaces facilitated both the practical needs for quality rest and the spiritual significance assigned to dreams, potentially containing divine messages for those serving essential religious functions. As full daylight approaches and Ra's solar bark begins its journey across the daytime sky, according to Egyptian religious belief, the complex choreography of service activities shifts once more. Those who maintained nighttime vigilance now seek their own rest in quarters designed to block daylight and minimize sound disruption. The previously sleeping contingent awakens to their morning duties, creating a seamless transition that ensures continuous temple functioning. This carefully orchestrated pattern maintained both the practical operations and symbolic eternal vigilance appropriate to spaces serving as interfaces between human and divine realms. Archaeological evidence reveals fascinating adaptations in sleep spaces for those with particularly demanding temple service schedules. Some sleeping quarters associated with high-status temple servants show evidence of portable water cooling systems, porous clay vessels positioned where prevailing breezes would enhance evaporative cooling effects, creating more comfortable rest environments for those sleeping during hot daylight hours. These environmental modifications recognize the challenges of quality sleep outside conventional nighttime hours, particularly in Egypt's often extreme climate conditions. For temple musicians, dancers, and chanters, service personnel whose performances formed essential components of religious ceremonies, sleep schedules coordinated with performance requirements rather than fixed daily patterns. Textual evidence mentions night singers and dawn musicians with specifically assigned performance times, suggesting specialized sleep patterns organized around these scheduled duties. The physically demanding nature of these performance roles required sufficient rest for quality execution, creating sleep schedules that prioritized recovery before major ceremonial performances. As morning fully establishes itself and the temple precinct returns to its daytime operations, consider how these varied sleep cycles created distinctly different lived experiences for various categories of temple servants. While sharing the same physical environment and serving the same institutional purposes, their subjective experience of time, when to be alert, when to rest, when to perform specific functions, created almost separate temporal worlds layered within the same physical space. These distinctive temporalities, organized around service requirements rather than individual preference, represent another way service positions shape the most fundamental aspects of daily experience. The sleep cycles of temple servants, with their careful coordination of rest and activity to maintain continuous operations, reflect broader Egyptian cultural values around time and eternity. Temples served as physical embodiments of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of cosmic order, truth, and justice. and their uninterrupted functioning symbolized the eternal order that sustained creation. For those who served in these contexts, adapting personal sleep patterns to maintain this continuous operation represented participation in sustaining cosmic order itself, elevating service beyond mere labor to participation in essential metaphysical maintenance. Textual evidence occasionally provides glimpses into how temple servants themselves understood their specialized sleep patterns. A fragmentary papyrus from the Temple of Hathor mentions, "Those who rest when others wake, who wake when others rest, who see the stars pass while others dream," suggesting recognition of the distinctive temporal experience of temple service. Rather than viewing disrupted or unconventional sleep as hardship, these texts sometimes frame alternate sleep cycles as privilege, allowing servants intimate connection with sacred times and astronomical events hidden from those following conventional patterns. For those servants with the most demanding temple schedules, archaeological and textual evidence suggests development of coping mechanisms to manage sleep disruption. Use of soporific substances derived from plants like mandrake or blue lotus might help induce sleep during unconventional hours, while stimulating preparations, including various herbs, helped maintain alertness during required periods of nighttime wakefulness. These botanical aids, administered within specific cultural and religious frameworks, allowed human biology to better align with institutional service requirements. As the sun climbs higher in the morning sky, casting shorter shadows across the temple complex, the full daily cycle of activities resumes its normal rhythm. Yet beneath this visible pattern lies the invisible architecture of varied sleep cycles that allowed continuous operation. Some servants now beginning their rest periods just as others complete theirs, creating unbroken human attention to sacred spaces across the complete cycle of day and night. This temporal coordination, as impressive as the physical architecture it maintained, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of human needs balanced against institutional requirements. The archaeological record occasionally reveals touching personal adaptations to these specialized sleep requirements. A wooden headrest found near temple servant quarters shows evidence of repeated repair, carefully mended breaks suggesting an object of personal importance used through many sleep cycles over an extended period. A sleeping mat from similar context appears to have been modified with additional padding in areas corresponding to pressure points, creating customized comfort for someone whose rest couldn't follow conventional patterns. These intimate artifacts remind us that behind institutional schedules were individual human experiences, bodies and minds adapting to service requirements while seeking sufficient comfort for necessary rest. As we conclude our exploration of sleep cycles in the shadow of the temples, we recognize how profoundly service positions shaped not just activities, but consciousness itself through their influence on when and how individuals experienced the fundamental human state of sleep. The requirements of continuous temple operation, maintaining eternal flame, securing sacred objects, preparing for precisely timed rituals, observing celestial movements, created distinctive temporal landscapes navigated by human servants whose bodies and minds adapted to these specialized patterns across generations of service. The moon that rose at the beginning of our exploration now sets in the western sky, completing its own celestial journey as the sun climbs higher toward noon. Like these celestial bodies that never simultaneously occupy the same sky, different categories of temple servants experience time in patterns that sometimes barely overlapped, creating separate yet interconnected worlds of service within the same physical spaces. In understanding these varied sleep cycles, we glimpse another dimension of service in ancient Egypt, not just where one worked or what tasks one performed, but when one was awake or asleep, alert or at rest, and how these temporal patterns shape the most intimate aspects of embodied experience. The desert wind gently shifts the sand, revealing a fragment of something man-made, perhaps a piece of pottery, a scrap of fabric, or a carved wooden object partially buried in the arid soil. This moment of discovery, repeated countless times across Egypt's ancient sites, begins the complex process through which modern understanding of ancient lives takes shape. For those seeking to understand how ordinary people, particularly those in service positions, actually lived and slept thousands of years ago, the archaeological record offers tantalizing clues that must be carefully assembled, interpreted, and contextualized. Like pieces of an enormous puzzle with many missing sections, these material remains challenge us to reconstruct the intimate daily experiences of people who left few written records of their personal lives. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of an archaeological excavation in a worker village dating to Egypt's New Kingdom period, approximately 1550–1070 BCE. The rectangular outlines of mud brick walls emerge from the surrounding sand, mapping the footprints of modest homes that once sheltered generations of families. Unlike the grand temples and tombs that attracted early archaeologists, these humble dwellings received serious scientific attention only in the 20th century, when archaeological focus expanded beyond monumental structures to include the living spaces of ordinary people. This shift in attention has revolutionized our understanding of daily life, including sleep practices for those who served in various capacities in ancient Egyptian society. As the morning sun climbs higher, archaeologists carefully document each layer of soil removed, each artifact recovered, building a three-dimensional record of how these spaces were used and modified over time. The evidence for sleeping arrangements emerges through multiple channels: architectural features that indicate permanent sleeping locations, portable objects associated with sleep, organic remains that suggest bedding materials, and the spatial arrangement of these elements within the overall dwelling. Together, these physical traces allow us to reconstruct with reasonable confidence how and where ancient Egyptians in service positions arranged their nightly rest. One of the most valuable archaeological sites for understanding workers' sleeping arrangements is Deir el-Medina, the remarkably preserved village that housed skilled artisans who created and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings during the New Kingdom period. Unlike many ancient settlements, Deir el-Medina was not continuously rebuilt over the centuries, but was abandoned when tomb production ceased, preserving its final phase of occupation in exceptional detail. Here, archaeologists discovered clear evidence of dedicated sleeping spaces within modest homes, raised platforms built along walls, typically in the rear or more private areas of the dwelling. These platforms, constructed of mud brick and faced with plaster, stood approximately 30–60 centimeters (12–24 inches) above floor level and measured about 80–90 centimeters (31–35 inches) wide by 170–190 centimeters (67–75 inches) long, dimensions suitable for adult bodies, though smaller than modern beds. Their placement typically maximized privacy within the constraints of small, multifunctional dwellings, with some houses featuring partial walls or screen supports that could provide visual separation of sleeping areas from main living spaces. The elevated position served practical purposes, reducing exposure to ground-level pests, creating a warmer sleeping surface, and providing some separation from activities continuing in other parts of the dwelling. Archaeological investigation of these sleeping platforms occasionally reveals small niches or recesses built into adjacent walls, spaces that once held oil lamps, amulets for protection during sleep, or small personal items needed before sleep or upon waking. These intimate details help reconstruct the experiential aspects of ancient sleep. The soft glow of an oil lamp gradually dimming as the wick burned down, the reassuring presence of protective deities represented in small figurines, the careful arrangement of essential items within arm's reach of the sleeping platform. At sites dating to different periods and serving different functions, archaeology reveals variations in sleeping arrangements that help us understand how service status influenced sleep experience. At Lahun, sometimes called Kahun, a Middle Kingdom settlement, circa 1850 BCE, built to house workers, constructing the pyramid of Senusret the Seku. Excavations revealed distinct differences between the larger houses presumed to belong to overseers and the rows of smaller, identical dwellings that housed ordinary workers. The smaller homes featured simple sleeping platforms, while some larger houses contained dedicated sleeping rooms with more elaborate appointments, including evidence of wooden bed frames that once supported reed mats for sleeping surfaces. The archaeological record becomes particularly revealing when catastrophic events preserved everyday arrangements intact, as at the site of Tel El Daba in the eastern Nile Delta, where rapid abandonment during a period of political instability left households essentially frozen in time. Here, excavations revealed reed sleeping mats still in position on platforms, headrests toppled exactly where they fell, and bedding materials preserved in the positions they occupied when last used. These rare snapshot preservations provide our most detailed glimpses into the actual arrangements of sleep spaces, confirming patterns inferred from more fragmentary evidence at other sites. Among the most informative artifacts for understanding ancient sleep are the preserved textiles recovered from tomb contexts, and occasionally from settlement sites with exceptional preservation conditions. These fragments of linen, sometimes with intact seams and hems, help reconstruct the bedding used by ancient Egyptians of various social levels. While the finest linens, with thread counts that would impress even modern manufacturers, were reserved for elite households, archaeological evidence confirms that those in service positions still typically had access to functional linen bedding of coarser but serviceable quality. Textile fragments found in worker contexts show signs of repeated mending and repurposing, suggesting that bedding represented a valuable possession maintained through careful repair rather than casual replacement. Headrests, the distinctive Egyptian pillows carved from wood, stone, or molded from pottery, appear consistently in archaeological contexts spanning wide social ranges, confirming their use was not limited to elites, but extended to those in various service positions. Examples found in worker villages show interesting variations from those in elite contexts, typically simpler in design, made from locally available materials rather than imported woods or precious substances, but still following the same fundamental ergonomic principles. Some examples from worker contexts show evidence of personalization through simple carved decorations or inscriptions, suggesting these objects held significance beyond mere functional value for their owners. Archaeological investigation occasionally reveals specialized sleeping arrangements for particular service contexts. At the worker camp near the Giza pyramids, excavations uncovered long barrack-style structures with evidence of multiple sleeping platforms arranged in rows, housing for temporary labor forces gathered for major construction projects. Unlike the family dwellings at sites like Deir el-Medina, these accommodations appear designed for single-sex occupation by workers separated from their families during project assignments. The archaeological evidence suggests reasonable provision for basic comfort, despite the temporary and communal nature of these facilities. Raised sleeping surfaces, hearths for warmth, and evidence of storage areas for personal possessions. For household servants living within the homes of those they served, the archaeological record reveals more variable sleeping arrangements. In some larger villas and elite houses, small side rooms or alcoves show evidence of sleeping platforms with simpler appointments than those in main family areas, likely accommodations for trusted household staff who remained within the dwelling overnight. In other contexts, the absence of dedicated servant sleeping spaces suggests that household servants might have unrolled portable sleeping mats in main living areas after the family retired, creating temporary sleeping arrangements. in multipurpose spaces. The physical trace of these more ephemeral sleeping arrangements remains more challenging to identify archaeologically, requiring careful attention to subtle floor wear patterns or concentrations of artifacts associated with sleep. Insect remains, recovered through careful archaeological sieving, provide another window into ancient sleep experiences. The presence of certain pests, bedbugs, fleas, and lice, in ancient Egyptian contexts confirms that those in service positions, like their social superiors, contended with these universal challenges to comfortable rest. The archaeological record also reveals responses to these challenges. Traces of certain insect-repelling herbs found near sleeping areas, fine-toothed combs for removing parasites, and evidence that sleeping platforms were sometimes treated with substances like natron, a naturally occurring mineral used in mummification, that might have deterred some insects through their desiccating properties. The archaeological evidence for seasonal adaptations in sleeping arrangements emerges through architectural features like staircases accessing roof areas, which are consistently found in homes across various social levels, including worker dwellings. These features confirm textual references to roof sleeping during hot summer months, a practice that provided relief from interior heat and potentially created more private sleeping spaces temporarily separated from the communal indoor environment. Some roofs show evidence of low perimeter walls or partial shelters that would have provided some protection for sleepers while maintaining exposure to cooling night breezes. Architectural adaptations, available even to those of relatively modest status. For temple servants and those attached to religious institutions, archaeological investigation reveals distinctive sleeping arrangements shaped by specialized service requirements. Excavations near temple complexes sometimes uncover structures interpreted as dormitories for rotating service personnel, with evidence of sleeping platforms arranged to accommodate multiple occupants, presumably serving shifts of temple duty. These structures typically feature architectural elements reflecting their specialized function. Orientation toward temple entrances for quick access, washing facilities for ritual purification, and sometimes evidence of sound insulation to protect sleepers from disturbance during rest periods between service shifts. One of the most challenging aspects of archaeological interpretation involves distinguishing different types of service relationships from material remains alone. The physical traces of sleeping arrangements for enslaved individuals, those in most restrictive service, versus indentured servants versus free but obligated workers, often appear very similar in the archaeological record. Subtle contextual clues sometimes help make these distinctions. Sleeping spaces with evidence of physical restriction might suggest enslaved status, while personalized possessions associated with sleeping areas could indicate greater personal autonomy. These interpretative challenges remind us that the nuanced social categories of ancient Egyptian service frequently defy simple modern categorization. The presence of children within service contexts emerges through careful archaeological attention to details like smaller body impressions on sleeping platforms, child-sized garments found in sleeping contexts, or toys and small objects associated with sleeping areas. These material traces confirm textual suggestions that service often involved entire families rather than individuals in isolation, with children incorporated into household labor appropriate to their ages while sharing sleeping spaces with parents or other adult relatives. The archaeological evidence reminds us that service in ancient Egypt was frequently an intergenerational experience with children raised within systems their parents occupied. As archaeological techniques have become more sophisticated, microscopic analysis of sediments from sleeping areas has revealed additional dimensions of ancient sleep experience. Pollen analysis sometimes identifies specific plants used to stuff sleeping cushions or strewn across sleeping areas for fragrance and insect repellent properties. Residue analysis can detect traces of oils or unguents applied to the body before sleep. practices mentioned in texts but confirmed through physical evidence from worker contexts, suggesting these comfort measures extended beyond elite households to those of more modest means. These microscopic traces help reconstruct the sensory aspects of ancient sleep, the scents, textures, and physical preparations that framed the transition to rest. The archaeological study of ancient Egyptian sleep has benefited enormously from ethnoarchaeology, the study of traditional practices in modern communities that might illuminate ancient patterns. Researchers working in rural Egyptian communities that maintain traditional sleeping arrangements into the 20th century documented practices like seasonal movements between indoor and outdoor sleeping spaces, the use of simple raised platforms covered with plant fiber mats, and the integration of sleeping areas into multifunctional household spaces. These observations have helped archaeologists interpret ambiguous physical evidence from ancient contexts by providing plausible models for how similar spaces and objects might have been used. As the sun reaches its zenith above our imagined archaeological site and excavators break for the midday meal, consider how these painstakingly recovered fragments of material evidence gradually assemble into a coherent picture of ancient sleep experience. No single artifact or architectural feature tells the complete story, but together, and when integrated with textual and artistic evidence, they allow us to reconstruct with reasonable confidence how those in various service positions arranged their nightly rest thousands of years ago. The resulting picture reveals not the stark deprivation that might be assumed from simplified narratives of ancient slavery, but rather a more complex reality of adequate if modest provision for this universal human need. The archaeological puzzle of ancient Egyptian sleep continues to evolve as new excavations, improved analytical techniques, and fresh theoretical approaches bring additional pieces into focus. Each fragment of a headrest, each preserved scrap of linen, each architectural feature identified as sleep-related adds detail to our understanding. Together, these material traces reveal the intimate dimensions of ancient lives otherwise known, primarily through institutional records or elite perspectives, providing glimpses of personal experience for those whose individual stories rarely entered the written record. In these humble objects and modest spaces, archaeology finds perhaps its most profound purpose, illuminating the universal human experiences that connect us across millennia to those who once dreamed beneath the same stars that still wheel above the sleeping land of Egypt. As twilight descends upon the ancient land of Egypt, the Great Pyramid of Giza catches the last rays of the setting sun, its limestone casing once gleaming gold and white against the darkening sky. This monumental structure, standing for over 4 millennia, represents not merely the ambition of the pharaoh Khufu who commissioned it, but the collective achievement of thousands of individuals whose names history has largely forgotten. As darkness embraces the desert and stars begin to appear in the indigo vault above, we turn our contemplation to the enduring legacy of those who served and labored in ancient Egypt, the dreamers whose sleep we have explored throughout our journey, and whose waking efforts transformed vision into reality on a scale that continues to inspire wonder in the modern world. Imagine yourself standing at the base of the Great Pyramid as night fully claims the landscape. The massive structure above you, composed of over 2 million stone blocks each weighing between 2 and 15 tons, seems almost supernatural in the moonlight, a geometric mountain created by human hands. Yet archaeological evidence has progressively revealed the surprisingly human story behind this seemingly superhuman achievement. The workers who built this monument were not masses of brutalized slaves driven by the lash, as popular imagination often portrays them, but a complex workforce of seasonal laborers, skilled craftspeople, permanent staff, and others in various service positions. all sustained by sophisticated organizational systems that provided for their basic needs, including appropriate rest. The legacy of these laborers extends far beyond the physical monuments they created. Their collective efforts shaped the very foundation of what we now recognize as civilization. Systems of coordinated effort, specialized knowledge transmission, technological innovation, and social organization that made monumental achievements possible while simultaneously establishing patterns that would influence human society for millennia to come. By examining this legacy through the lens of the workers themselves rather than merely the products of their labor, we gain deeper understanding of how ordinary people in service positions contributed to extraordinary outcomes that continue to resonate in our modern world. Archaeological evidence from worker villages like Deir el-Medina reveals that those who created Egypt's magnificent monuments lived lives of surprising complexity and dignity. Excavations have uncovered not just the functional aspects of their existence, the sleeping platforms, cooking hearths, and work tools, but also evidence of rich interior lives, simple musical instruments, board games carved into floors, or created as portable objects, religious amulets reflecting personal devotion, and written records ranging from poetic expressions to complaints about working conditions. These traces remind us that the people who built eternity were fully human, individuals who dreamed, hoped, loved, and aspired beyond their immediate circumstances. The organizational achievement represented by Egypt's monumental construction project stands among the most significant legacies of ancient laborers. Written records preserved on papyrus and ostraca, pottery fragments used as writing surfaces, reveal sophisticated systems for mobilizing, housing, feeding, and managing large workforces, sometimes numbering in the thousands, for sustained periods. These administrative innovations established patterns that would influence large-scale human organization for millennia, from the precise division of labor into specialized teams to the careful recording of resources allocated and work completed. Modern project management, with its emphasis on coordination, resource allocation, and milestone tracking, has roots in these ancient systems developed to channel human effort effectively toward monumental goals. As the night deepens and stars multiply across the vast desert sky, consider how the skilled workers of ancient Egypt transmitted specialized knowledge across generations, creating lineages of expertise that sustained technological capabilities over centuries. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals formalized apprenticeship systems, particularly for specialized crafts associated with monumental construction and decoration. Young individuals, often sons following fathers but sometimes selected for aptitude regardless of parentage, would progressively learn increasingly complex skills under careful supervision. This knowledge transmission system ensured that techniques developed through generations of trial and error would not be lost, creating continuous refinement of methods for everything from quarrying massive stone blocks to mixing pigments for tomb decoration. The technological legacy of ancient Egyptian workers encompasses innovations whose influence extended far beyond their original context. Techniques for moving massive stone blocks using simple machines like levers, rollers, and ramps, developed through practical experimentation by anonymous workers, established foundational principles of mechanical advantage still taught in physics classrooms today. Methods for accurately measuring and laying out large-scale architectural plans using simple tools like stretched rope, plumb bobs, and set squares demonstrated sophisticated practical application of mathematical principles. Even seemingly mundane, innovations like specialized tools adapted to specific construction tasks represent important contributions to humanity's technological heritage. Beyond these practical legacies lies a more profound contribution, what we might call the demonstration of human potential for coordinated achievement. The monuments of ancient Egypt stand as enduring proof that human beings working together, with purpose and organization, can accomplish what might seem impossible for any individual. This legacy of collective achievement has inspired societies throughout history, serving as reminder that our greatest accomplishments often come not through isolated genius, but through effective coordination of many hands and minds working toward shared purpose. For those in service positions particularly, this legacy offers recognition that even labor performed under obligation can contribute to outcomes of lasting significance and beauty. The archaeological record reveals that those who served in ancient Egypt participated in creating not just physical monuments but cultural systems of remarkable sophistication and durability. The religious practices, artistic traditions, mathematical knowledge, astronomical observations, and literary forms developed and maintained through their efforts established patterns that would influence human culture far beyond Egypt's borders. And long after its ancient civilization had transformed into new forms, as preservers and transmitters of cultural knowledge, those in service positions, from temple scribes to craftspeople reproducing traditional designs, played crucial roles in maintaining continuity across generations while allowing for gradual innovation within established frameworks. The night grows deeper, the stars tracing their ancient paths across the heavens. The same celestial bodies that guided Egyptian astronomers in orienting temples and monuments with remarkable precision. This astronomical legacy represents another profound contribution of ancient Egyptian workers and servants who meticulously observed and recorded celestial patterns over generations, creating accurate calendars and alignment systems that synchronized human activity with cosmic rhythms. Their practical application of astronomical knowledge for purposes ranging from agricultural planning to architectural orientation established approaches to integrating natural cycles with human endeavor that continue to influence how we understand our relationship with the natural world. For the individuals whose sleep patterns and arrangements we have explored throughout our journey, participation in creating monuments designed for eternity offered a form of transcendence beyond their immediate circumstances. Textual evidence occasionally provides glimpses of how ordinary workers viewed their contributions to sacred or royal projects. Expressions of pride in craftsmanship, references to leaving personal marks, sometimes literally, in the form of mason's marks hidden within structures on works intended to last forever, and awareness of participating in enterprises with spiritual significance beyond ordinary labor. This sense of connection to something larger and more enduring than individual life represents an important aspect of how service work was experienced and understood by those who performed it. The social legacy of ancient Egyptian labor systems reveals both troubling and inspiring aspects that continue to resonate in modern discussions of work, service, and social organization. The hierarchical structures that assign different values to different types of contribution established patterns that would influence social stratification throughout subsequent history. Yet archaeological evidence also reveals countervailing tendencies: the recognition of skill regardless of social origin, the capacity for individuals to improve their status through demonstrated ability, and the acknowledgement that even the most elaborate monuments required contributions from workers at all levels of the social hierarchy. This complex interplay between hierarchy and interdependence continues to shape how human societies organize collective effort toward ambitious goals. As midnight approaches in our contemplation beneath the stars, consider how the experience of those who served in ancient Egypt might offer insights relevant to modern questions about the meaning and dignity of labor. Archaeological evidence showing care in providing appropriate rest, sustenance, and even medical treatment for workers challenges simplistic narratives about ancient labor conditions, while raising questions about what constitutes ethical treatment of those who serve in various capacities. The evident pride in craftsmanship visible in even humble objects from worker context suggests the deep human need for meaningful work regardless of social status. A reminder that dignity in labor comes not just from compensation or conditions, but from connection to purpose and quality in what one produces. The written legacy left by some literate workers provides our most direct connection to the subjective experience of those who served in ancient Egypt. Texts preserved from sites like Deir el-Medina include not just administrative records, but personal expressions, complaints about late payment or difficult supervisors, records of dreams believed to contain significant messages, simple poems about daily experiences, and religious dedications reflecting personal devotion. These writings, sometimes inscribed on ostraka during rest periods or after the day's official work concluded, remind us that those who built monuments to others' immortality had their own voices, perspectives, and interior lives, despite their limited representation in formal historical records. The health legacy revealed through bioarchaeological analysis of worker remains provides another dimension of understanding ancient service. Examination of skeletal remains from worker cemeteries shows evidence of both the physical toll of demanding labor, spine deformations, arthritic joints, healing fractures consistent with construction accidents, and surprisingly, sophisticated medical interventions including successfully set broken bones, dental work, and evidence of care during recovery from injuries. This physical record suggests communities that, while certainly demanding significant labor from members, also maintain systems for addressing the inevitable health consequences of such work, recognizing the practical value of maintaining worker well-being even within systems of obligation and service. As the night begins its gradual transition toward dawn, with the first faint lightening of the eastern horizon, reflect on how the legacy of ancient Egyptian workers continues to evolve through ongoing archaeological discovery and interpretation. Each new excavation of worker settlements, each translation of previously undeciphered texts, each application of new analytical techniques to ancient remains adds dimension to our understanding of those who served and built in this ancient civilization. Their legacy is not fixed in stone despite the durability of the monuments they created, but continues to develop as we ask new questions and apply new approaches to understanding their lives and contributions. The first birds begin their pre-dawn songs, continuing patterns of awakening that have remained consistent since ancient workers stirred from sleep on reed mats to begin another day of creation. This continuity of natural rhythms across millennia provides perspective on the brief span of individual human lives compared to the enduring impact of collective human achievement. The workers who shaped ancient Egypt's monuments might labor for a lifetime on structures intended to last for eternity, contributing their limited span of effort to outcomes that would far outlast their personal memory. In this participation in creating the seemingly immortal, perhaps they found meaning that transcended the constraints of their particular service positions. The eastern sky continues to brighten, stars gradually fading as the eternal cycle of day and night continues its rhythm uninterrupted since before human consciousness arose to observe it. The monuments of ancient Egypt, aligned with such precision to celestial events, stand as testament to human capacity to recognize pattern beyond individual lifespan, to understand, honor, and work in harmony with cycles larger than any single generation could observe in entirety. This cosmic perspective represents another aspect of the ancient worker legacy, a reminder that meaningful human endeavor often requires contribution to processes and outcomes that extend beyond individual experience or benefit. As full daylight returns to the desert landscape, illuminating once more the monuments that have stood watch through countless cycles of darkness and light, the legacy of ancient Egyptian workers invites us to reconsider conventional narratives about historical progress and human flourishing. The individuals who slept on reed mats, rested heads on wooden supports, shared communal sleeping spaces, and adapted their rest patterns to service requirements lived what modern perspective consider materially simple lives. Yet they participated in creating works of such ambition, precision, and beauty that they continue to inspire awe thousands of years later. Their legacy challenges us to question simplistic equations between material comfort and meaningful existence, between social status and significant contribution. The sun now stands fully above the horizon, casting long morning shadows from the ancient stones across the desert sand. The day begins anew for modern Egypt, with lives and labors continuing in the same landscape where ancient workers once dreamed and built. The connection between past and present, between ancient service and modern contribution, reminds us that human history consists not merely of the actions of the powerful and privileged, whose names fill official records, but equally of the countless individuals who sleep, wake, work, dream, and create, often in service role, whose collective efforts ultimately shape the world more profoundly than any individual achievement, regardless of how prominently recorded. As we conclude our exploration of ancient Egyptian sleep and service, we recognize that the true legacy of those whose rest patterns and arrangements we have examined lies not just in the monuments they helped create, but in the demonstration of human capacity for finding meaning, dignity, and purpose within systems of obligation and service. The archaeological record, with its humble headrests, simple sleeping mats, and modest dwellings, reminds us that profound human experiences, rest, dreams, intimacy, family bonds, spiritual connection, occurred within material circumstances that appear basic by modern standards. Yet, from these seemingly simple foundations arose achievements that continue to expand our understanding of what humanity can accomplish through coordinated effort sustained across generations. The dreams that built eternity were not just those of pharaohs who commissioned monuments, but equally those of the individuals who translated vision into reality through their daily labor, who slept on reed mats to rest bodies tired from moving massive stones, who cradled heads on wooden supports before rising to mix pigments for tomb paintings that would retain their vibrant color for millennia, who shared communal sleeping spaces while contributing specialized skills to projects requiring hundreds of cooperating experts. Their legacy lives not just in stone, but in the enduring demonstration that human greatness emerges not from individual genius alone, but from the coordinated contribution of many hands, guided by shared purpose and accumulated knowledge passed carefully from generation to generation through systems that honored skill regardless of social origin. As the new day fully claims the ancient landscape, with modern visitors beginning to arrive at sites where ancient workers once labored, this legacy continues to inspire and instruct across the vast distance of time, reminding us that in the great accounting of human achievement, the contributions of those who serve, who labor, who maintain and sustain, may ultimately prove as significant as those who command, design, or claim credit. The monuments that still stand in the Egyptian desert were truly built by dreams, not just the grand visions of rulers, but the nightly dreams of countless individuals who rested on simple sleeping surfaces before rising to add their particular skills to enterprises whose full scope they might never personally witness, yet whose enduring impact continues to expand our understanding of human potential for creation and collaboration. As our journey through ancient Egyptian sleep and service concludes, may you carry with you not just historical knowledge, but deeper appreciation for how the most ordinary human experiences like nightly rest connect us across vast distances of time and circumstance to those who came before. As you drift toward your own dreams tonight, perhaps on surfaces far more luxurious than reed mats or wooden headrests, remember those ancient dreamers whose labor transformed vision into enduring reality. In sleep, as in our highest achievements, we share a common humanity that transcends the boundaries of time, culture, and social position, finding in our universal need for rest and renewal the quiet reminder that beneath all distinctions of rank or role lies our shared human experience of consciousness and its nightly surrender to dreams.